Okay. Hello and welcome to WSU Sports coverage of the NBA playoffs. I am your host, Jonathan Haidt, and joining me tonight is my always fabulous, excellent co-host and partner in crime, Mr. Joe Matthews. Joe, how you doing tonight?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jonathan. I'm doing good. It's down where I'm operating from on the Jersey Shore. It is getting hot. I mean, it is hotter than hot out right now. And that means summer's on its way. And with summer coming, that means it's time for the NBA playoffs, one of the most exciting times of the year in all of sports. Always fun to watch, see all the, historic moments that happen every year in the playoffs. This year, it's going to be the first normal playoffs. I mean, last year we had it, but it was in the bubble. There weren't really fans. It was a sort of a weird environment. This year, it's going to be back to normal. Arenas are going to be, filled with fans who are vaccinated and socially distancing. And it's just going to be awesome. And it's going to be really great to get back to some really, really great NBA basketball. And it's going to be a really, really fun, next month or so and seeing how these things shake out. And we're here to break it down for you, tell you what to expect, and hype for it.
Yeah, again, Joe, living about 20 minutes from you, I can reiterate the fact that it is scorching hot outside. But again, the heat is rising, that the NBA playoffs is here. We saw the bubble last year in Orlando, how that all played out. This year, there's fans. Oh, MSG came out a couple of days ago, or I believe yesterday, and announced that the first two games for the Knicks will be 15,000 capacity. It's going to be somewhat normal NBA playoffs basketball. And there's so much to talk about. And for the next 2.5 hours, we'll have all your coverage for everything you need for any of your favorite teams. And Joe and I will be here to guide you along the way. We'll have four excellent of our rising stars and actual stars already of our WSU sports staff to break it down for you. So before we bring in our first beat reporter, Ryan Henry, who will be covering the Sixers, Joe, I just want to ask you just a couple of questions off the bat just to get the ball rolling. So this year, the first brand new thing is that there's a play-in tournament, which might be insane to some. It might just be, people like it, people dislike it. There's a lot to really break down with it. But just to go over some of the results, we saw in the East, the 9-10 game, the Pacers defeated the Hornets, 144-117. The Celtics defeated the Wizards in the 7-8 seed game. The 8 seed game, the Wizards defeated the Pacers last night to become the 8 seed in the Eastern Conference. In the West, the Grizzlies took down the Spurs 100-97 in the 9-10 game. In the 7-8 seed game, the Lakers defeated the Warriors, and arguably the best game of the tournament. And tonight, right after our show ends, the Warriors would take on the Grizzlies in that last of the seeding to get into the tournament to face the Utah Jazz in round number 1. So, Joe, my question to you is, after watching the games, kind of breaking it down, just being exposed to it for the first time, what were some of your takeaways from everything so far with the tournament?
I liked it. I mean, it's always good to have more basketball and more things to watch, more entertainment. And, I think overall, in terms of, I think what the NBA was going for was to get, some of that extra TV revenue because, money drives all, especially in the NBA and in big sports leagues. But I mean, they got a pretty good ratings for those games. I think I saw somewhere the Lakers Warriors game had about 6.5 million people tuned in and watching, which, it accomplished the goal of being, fun to watch for some of the games. I mean, that Lakers Warriors game was outstanding to watch. And I mean, it really felt like a high intensity, late round playoff game. Some of the other ones, like, I mean, the Wizards just completely trounced Indiana. That wasn't really anything, worth watching. So, I mean, there's two sides of the ball to play it as where, some of those games they were really, really great to watch. And at the same time, I mean, as it stands right now, unless the Grizzlies win tonight, it's just going to be what the playoffs would have been in a normal year. The teams that finished 1 through 8 made it. I mean, the Celtics and Wizards, who are the 7 and 8 seed teams, they're the ones that both came out of the East play-in tournament. And the Lakers were the 7 seed and they came out. And, the Warriors are the 8 seed and Grizzlies are the 9 seed. So if the Warriors win, it's going to kind of be like there was no point. I feel like people could argue to the play-in tournament because, the best teams rose to the top anyways. It was fun to see. And I mean, it's a thing that I kind of hope sticks around because it could really, we didn't see it this year, but if like a team, like a 10 seed team, like, the Hornets or the Pacers, one of those lower seeds who really normally wouldn't have gotten the shot to make the playoffs, if they were able to make it in and if they were able to go on a run, I mean, that would have been an amazing story. So I think it's always good to have it there to keep that potential for something like that happening, give teams a little extra chance, to bust into the playoffs. So, Was it the most exciting and exhilarating that it could have been? Not really. There were a handful of games, some blowouts, but I mean, overall, I enjoyed it and I enjoyed watching it. And like I said, more basketball is always a good thing. I mean, instead of having a couple of days of a lull where there's really no games while you wait for teams to get ready for the playoffs. I mean, it just seamlessly went. And the regular season, playing tournament started, and then tonight's the last game, and then tomorrow the playoffs start. So there's no break in the action. That's always a fun thing to watch, and it was a good time. I enjoyed watching the games. So
Yeah, Joe, it was definitely an interesting prelude to everything. And like you said, a lot of the stuff could have just happened without the tournament with seeding wise, because I think the NBA was kind of going for that a lower seed team like the Hornets with LaMelo, but potentially could sneak into the playoffs and maybe even boost the ratings even a little bit more. But I think that Lakers Warriors game where we saw LeBron and Curry go at it, that matchup kind of saved it, to be honest. I think that will definitely keep the NBA thinking about it for years to come, and that the viewers flocked in for that game. And like you said, I think it ranked higher than some of the NBA finals in previous years, just that one game alone. And seeing, obviously it was a hard fought game. Steph Curry, has put the words on his back the entire second half of the season. And we will debate who the MVP should be throughout our entire show, but we'll save our picks for later once we hear our analysts first. But that game was just that LeBron shot at the end to tie and to clinch it. I think was just another defining moment of his career and something that the NBA was definitely, I'm sure, thrilled that happened to really boost the ratings of that event to keep people wanting more in previous years previous years, not just jumping right into the playoffs, having some of the lower seeds kind of battle it out and have some definitely vintage NBA playoff basketball. It was definitely very interesting. So again, the playing tournament I think was a success. We could both agree. But before we bring Mr. Henry on, I want to ask you just one more question before we get started and jump right into the entire field. So for the most part, except for the game tonight, the field is set. We have the 8 teams in the East and just waiting on the number 8 seed in the West, whether it's going to be the Warriors or the Grizzlies. So, Joe, just give me just one thought in your mind about the entire field this year. Is there any one storyline that you're just really sticking into your mind right before the playoffs start, which they will start tomorrow at the time of this recording, but just anything that just jumps out to you right away?
my eyes are on the Western Conference because I think the way the Western Conference, sort of shaped out this year and the way the seeding fell out towards the end of the year, it's going to be really, really interesting because there's a lot of good teams in that conference. I mean, the West has been one of the most deep conferences in the NBA for a couple of years running now. But I mean, this year, like just looking at some of the matchups, the Suns and the Lakers are playing round one. And both of those teams are teams that I've seen people pick to be the NBA champion this year. And they're immediately out of the gate, they're going to be going at it. You've got the Jazz at the top of the conference. I mean, the Clippers are one of the better teams in the NBA, and they're sitting right around the middle at a 4 seed, And so there's a lot. I think for the first round, especially in the West, there's a lot of things that can happen. It's going to be hard to predict, at least for me, how some of those series are going to shake out because I really feel like there's a wide variance of how things can go. I mean, in the East, I feel like it's a lot more top heavy, where it's the Sixers, Nets, Bucks. Knicks are sort of, a little bit of a tier below, but I mean, after the Knicks, I feel like there's kind of a really significant drop off when it gets to like the Hawks and the Heat, Wizards, Celtics. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a lot. I feel like if you had to put money on it, I would go with the East being a lot more of a chalk type bracket and the real top teams advancing and moving on. But I think in the Western Conference side, you could see a lot of, surprising potential upsets happen. Maybe the Warriors, if they sneak in as the 8 seed, they pull out some magic and, turn back the clock to the We Believe Warriors and they upset the Jazz as the 8 seed. The Lakers could conceivably make the NBA Finals as a 7 seed, which I actually don't have the stat pulled up now, but I believe that if the Lakers make it this year, they would be the lowest seeded NBA's Finals team ever. So, I mean, it's going to be really fun to watch the West this year. I'm really excited to see how it's going to shake out because, I mean, I really am sort of all over the place when, looking at, who's going to make it to the conference finals and who's going to make it to the finals and, who's going to win these first round matchups. It's just, you look at it and it looks chaotic. And to me, that just signals that it's going to be fun.
Yeah, Joe, I really liked how you really emphasized the West. That's why they call it the Wild West every single year. Just the amount of star power that's loaded across, potentially all 8 teams, and just seeing how, again, the East is more top heavy. We're all going to agree on that, I believe. And a lot of the stars from the West, like Kevin Durant, James Harden, they did go from the West to the East. So making the Eastern Conference top 3 teams a little bit more top heavy. I think when we get to the Bucks Heat matchup, that series could go either way. I think the Heats could potentially pull up the upset. But I just think overall the West is going to be a shootout. Can the Jazz and the Suns, too, young, not really that battle-tested teams, especially the Suns, can they defeat the defending champs Lakers, who have been injury-riddled the whole season? LeBron and Anthony Davis have been beat up. They've just started to get back together, starting to mesh again. And the Suns, it's Devin Booker. He's been dominating for years. Now he's got a chance in the playoffs. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it's all going to play out, especially with the Jazz and the Suns, which we'll get into in a little bit. But again, the West is going to be just unbelievable to watch some of these series. Even like a Denver Nuggets and Portland Trailblazers series where Jamal Murray's out and the Trailblazers are always hot every single year going into the playoffs. And now they're playing the Jamal Murray-less Denver Nuggets with potentially the MVP, Nikola Jokic. So it should be very interesting. But now we will shift into our main part of our show where we'll be breaking down all of the teams in contention this year and the actual first-round matchups. So joining us first is Mr. Ryan Henry, who will be breaking down the number 1 seeded Philadelphia 76ers. So as we wait for him to join, again, the Sixers were 49-23 this year and clinched their first number 1 seed, the first time since 2001. So Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jonathan. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. There's just so much to talk about with your Philly. I can see all your Philly fandom in the back. You've been definitely an excellent choice to break down everything for the 76ers. But let's just get right into it. Let's just talk about the team first before we really break down their matchup in the first round, which we learned last night will be the Washington Wizards. So again, Ryan, you've been a longtime Philly fan, and you've seen over the past couple of years, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, they're together, they're the duo, and now it's another year of can they go far? Can they translate the regular season success into a playoff run? So just right off the bat, what are some takeaways from this team, this Philly team in particular, that's been different in previous years that's kind of elevated them to this number 1 seed?
I mean, shout out to Daryl Morey for the job he did, because if you're looking at this team just a year ago, you're wondering, what was the ceiling for this team? And, they got bounced in the first round. Then Daryl Morey, former GM of the Houston Rockets, comes in, brings in Seth Curry, brings in Danny Green, brings in Dwight Howard. So I would say he's bringing in some veteran presence, some winners. Dwight Howard and Danny Green won last year. And also the team has just more spacing around them. I mean, Curry, Danny Green have been great. Shake Milton's really stepped up. So has Furkan Korkmaz. So if I really had to say anything that's really different from these two teams, it's that there's championship pedigree on this team and there's more floor spacing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said about the spacing. That was a big thing that I've noticed watching the Sixers team this year, is that it's a completely different world in terms of spacing, what they added with Danny Green and Seth Curry. And that leads me into this question that I want to sort of ask you, which is surrounded around Ben Simmons, who in years past, he's kind of gotten flack for his performance in the playoffs because he's not the most versatile offensive player. He's no doubt fantastic and one of the best, lane scorers in the entire league. But the fact that he doesn't really have an outside jump shot, that sort of made it a little easier for teams to sort of hone in on him and sort of shut him down in a series, especially because the Sixers of years past weren't that great with spacing. But this year, with the talent they have around Simmons and, the shooters they have, I feel like it's going to be a lot harder for teams to just zero in and, okay, let's just shut down Ben Simmons, because now you have that spacing around him that's going to let him get inside and play his game the way he likes to play it. So on your thoughts, do you think that this is going to be sort of a narrative busting playoffs for Ben Simmons, and he's going to show the world that, no, I can't, my style of basketball can translate to winning in the playoffs and I can be a real impact player?
I would like to say yes, but my gut is telling me no, because it's not even the fact that he can't shoot that's the problem with me. I mean, there's guys like Zion and Giannis, they're not good shooters, but they are still dominant. He just plays very passive, and he's 6'10", 6'10", 7 feet, 240. He has the size to really average almost 25 points a night realistically. But he have these stretches where he just doesn't, I won't say doesn't care, but he just is very passive and isn't aggressive. It's his attitude towards scoring is what really throws me off. And, yeah, we have all that floor spacing, but if you double off of Joel Embiid and leave Ben Simmons wide open, he's going to have to shoot at some point. So as much as I'd love to say that this would be a narrative busting season for Ben Simmons, what especially the past 2 months have shown me, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I just think we've seen it in years past. I think Ben Simmons' career average in the playoffs, I believe, is like 15 points a game. I think for Philly to really take that next step this year, they're going to have to find some offense outside of Joel Embiid in crunch time. And I think, as you know, as a Philadelphia fan, it's going to be difficult. You'll see down the stretch if a team like in the top of the Eastern Conference, like a Nets or a Bucks, if they take out Embiid, in the front court, are they going to be able to find other scoring options? Will Seth Curry kind of break through and give some scoring off the bench? Will Ben Simmons be able to become that official number 2 to Joel Embiid? Like, will it happen? Just remains to be seen. But now let's kind of shift towards, we found out last night, their first round matchup against the Washington Wizards, who just squeaked into the playoffs. They're 34-38 overall season record, below 500, but with the play-in tournament, they made it. So Ryan, just real quick, what are some of your initial thoughts when you heard that they were matched up against the Wizards, who have, the dynamic duo of Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook? And Westbrook and Ben Simmons kind of have a similar play style, driving at will, not really take a lot of outside shots. Obviously, Westbrook takes a little bit more. But what are just some of your initial thoughts about when you heard that this matchup was going to go on?
I mean, as a fan, I enjoyed this matchup than potentially playing the Pacers. No offense against the Pacers, but they're an injury-riddled team. So, at least as a fan, I get to see a more exciting matchup. I get to watch Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal, who are two of the most exciting players to watch. I mean, regardless of who we played, this should be an easy sweep. If not, the Wizards get one game. I mean, the Wizards don't have the defensive players or, scheme to really challenge a Joel Embiid. I mean, I know they're a different position, but just like what happened to Jason Tatum, they had no one they put on him, and he just scored 50 points at will. I mean, they don't have anyone that can guard Joel Embiid. Daniel Gafford's a nice player, but he's not going to stop Joel Embiid. Not many players can. And so it would just be exciting to see Russell Westbrook play playoff basketball, because Russell Westbrook's one of the more enjoyable players to watch, in my opinion, but it should be an easy 4-game series sweep, if not 5 games.
And you just made that point about Russell Westbrook. I want to kind of touch on him real quick. He's, in my opinion, one of the more overhated players in the league. He doesn't always get a lot of respect. People say, he can't, his style of basketball does not translate to winning games, that he can't carry a team. And, he's more of a stat padder, et cetera, just chases triple doubles. I really don't think that's the case. I think he's a generational talent, first ballot Hall of Famer. We're never going to see another player like him. But, I mean, addressing some of those sort of narrative questions with the Wizards this year, I mean, it sounds like you aren't much of a believer in them. But do you think there is a world where Russell Westbrook can really just kick it into another gear? I mean, he finished the season absolutely on fire. Do you think there's a universe where he could just find that next level and carry this Wizards team? And maybe they don't upset the Sixers in the first round, but you think they have the potential to maybe give the Sixers some fits and maybe drag it to 6, maybe even 7 games? Or do you think it's just going to be more of an easy sweep?
It's going to be more of an easy sweep, because I feel like it's so impossible for Russell Westbrook to take up another gear. I mean, he really took another gear this season. If you looked at the Wizards before, like at the beginning of the season, they were the second worst team in the Eastern Conference, and they worked their way up to the 8th overall record in the conference. So, I mean, I don't know if there's another gear you can go up to. It's very hard to improve from like 23, 16, and 15. I mean, that's what he's been averaging like the last 5 to 10 games. I mean, it's very hard to just up that another level. I mean, the Wizards will be an interesting team for next year, I'll say, because they should have their center Thomas Bryant back, and they should have Denny Avdija, who was their rookie this year. He should hopefully improve, but I just don't see a world where Russell Westbrook can really improve, because I think it's very hard to go another level from how good he's already been this season.
Yeah, I mean, Russell Westbrook for so many years has just been unjustly, just criticized for absolutely nothing, just playing to his absolute potential, averaging a triple-double, just been gotten a lot of unnecessary hate. And I think especially in this Philly series, obviously we think the Sixers are going to take this one, but he's going to definitely make a huge impact. I can almost guarantee have a triple-double by the end of it, averaging scoring-wise. But so now, Ryan, going past the Wizards series, just you know this team inside and out. You know how they play. You know their strengths. You know their weaknesses. Do you think they could be potential NBA champions? So just give us your kind of finals prediction that you think will happen at the end of the playoffs.
The only way the Sixers make the finals, in my opinion, if if one of the three Nets big three is not healthy. The Nets and their current state, there's no way there. I don't think there's a chance they beat them. And it's just the credit of how offensively talented that team is. I mean, you have two MVPs on that team who are in their prime, and then you also have Kyrie Irving, who is also a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, the Sixers team is great, but I think there's just way too much offensive firepower on the Brooklyn Nets for them to make it. I mean, it should be a solid series. I think if the Nets play the Sixers, it should be a 6-game series, but there's just way too much offensive firepower on Brooklyn for the Sixers to pull off the upset.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see how the Sixers match up against a team like Brooklyn because, I mean, you look at it and kind of on paper, you'd think that, maybe the Sixers, I feel like, probably have the best shot to take down the Nets, especially because the sort of Achilles heel for the Nets this year has been defense, and that interior defense, they get exposed by dominant big men. And Joel Embiid is the best center in the NBA, arguably, along with Nikola Jokic. But talking about Embiid, that sort of segues into what I want to ask you now, Ryan, which is obviously just in the recent days, the NBA announced their finalists for the different awards for this regular season. And Joel Embiid is one of the 3 finalists for MVP, along with Steph Curry and Nikola Jokic. And so who do you think is going to take that home when the voting's said and done? Do you think Embiid can pull it off despite missing time, or would you pivot towards one of the other 2 winning?
I think it's Nikola Jokic. I mean, even as a Sixers fan, I think it's Nikola Jokic. In my opinion, you can't be the MVP and miss a third of the season. I mean, yeah, there's the season shortened due to COVID, but he still missed like 20 games this season due to injury. I mean, I don't think he can be the most valuable player and miss that much time. I mean, Joel Embiid had a great season, but I just think the time he did not play due to injuries, I just don't think he'll win it.
Yeah, just unfortunately, I just think if Joel Embiid was healthy this year, he definitely had a very, very good shot of winning MVP. He was just so dominant. And when you look at the voting, a lot of what is weighed into it is how far you take your team by the end of the regular season. That's why the Nikola Jokic argument over Steph Curry is the Nuggets are the 3 seed, and they were still able to win with Nikola Jokic when Jamal Murray went down. And the Warriors, they did make the play-in tournament, but there's just more support for Jokic at this point than Curry. But there's been a kind of a late surge for Curry, so to say. But I definitely think Joel Embiid, if he plays like this next year, I think he could take it home. If he replicates this into a full season again, I think it's easily possible. But Ryan, my last question for you is, it's another kind of Philly focused question, but it's also about the end of the year awards. Is we've seen now for the defensive player of the year, it's also kind of a deadlock where is it Rudy Gobert? Is it Ben Simmons? And, Ben Simmons, I think, is just so versatile that he is a point guard and he can guard 1 through 5 on the floor. He's shown that, time and time again. If his offense dries up in the playoffs, I think that could be his best, thing he thinks he brings to the table for the Sixers. So who's your pick for defensive player of the year?
I'm wearing the Ben Simmons jersey and I'm a Philly fan, but I think it's Rudy Gobert. I mean, Ben Simmons has just been really inconsistent for me, even defensively. I know he was trying to push that narrative later into the season, or push the narrative like at the later point of the season saying, I'm defensive player of the year, but he really wasn't showing anything for it. I mean, to be honest, him and Matisse Thybulle have been I think on par defensively. Like, you can make an argument that Matisse Thybulle's been a better defender, at least these last couple of months, than Ben Simmons. I mean, Rudy Gobert, he's been very consistent the entire year. He's the reason why the Jazz are the number 1 defensive team. I mean, if you look at just the eye test, the metrics, Rudy Gobert leads them all. As much as I want Ben Simmons to win it, he just hasn't been consistent enough. And you can make an argument he hasn't even been the best defender on his team these past few months.
Yeah, you touched on Matisse Thybulle there, Ryan, and that brings me to one sort of last point I want to make in regards to the Sixers, who Thybulle is obviously one of the younger guys on the Sixers. He's got a ton of potential. I mean, as a Nets fan, I do not like the Sixers, but I love Matisse Thybulle. It pains me that he's on our travel because he's so much fun to watch. He's amazing on defense, and I think the sky's the limit for him. But you sort of touched on a little bit that, the Sixers may need to find another source of offense, that Joel Embiid probably can't carry the whole load, and Ben Simmons is a bit too inconsistent to really be that true second option. So do you think there's someone who maybe it is like a Matisse Thybulle or one of the other young guys, or just someone unexpected like a Furkan Korkmaz, who is going to really take the next step in this playoffs and that you could see blossoming and really having a great, couple of rounds and stepping into that number 2 scoring role?
Well, I think there's two different questions you're kind of asking. I think the number 2 scorer will be Tobias Harris, no matter what. I think he's really gone under the radar as a player who's like, he's been averaging around 20 points a season, I think on 50, 40, 90. He's been one of the more underrated players this season. But to say there's a young guy I think who could jump, I mean, if he gets the minutes, I think Tyrese Maxey can definitely show up. The problem is Doc Rivers really hasn't been playing him that much. The only time he ever plays him is when all their guys are hurt, which, I mean, you can make the argument it's a rookie, but when he gets minutes, I feel like he always produces at a high level. So if he gets the minutes, I would say Tyrese Maxey. But if we're saying someone who I think realistically will get playoff minutes, I think someone like a Furkan Korkmaz or a Shake Milton will be that younger guy who can elevate the offense.
Yeah, I like what you said, Ryan, about especially Tyrese Maxey. I was very high on him and Emmanuel quickly going into this season. And to see both of them ball out in two of the biggest markets in the NBA, I think it's been great to see. And I really hope that Doc Rivers will play him throughout the stretch in the playoffs. If the Sixers do need some scoring off the bench to kind of supplement, if Joel Embiid ends up really carrying, and if Tobias Harris and Ben Simmons kind of flip-flop offensively, just to see how it goes. But we just want to thank you, Ryan, for giving up your time today to tell us all about Philadelphia basketball. And we really appreciate you stopping by and just giving everything you have to say about it. So just thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
See you, Ryan.
See you.
That was Ryan Henry. If you want to follow Ryan on Twitter, it is at RyanJHenry20. Just to hear about any of his awesome stuff on Twitter that he puts out, especially with stuff at WSOU. So now, Joe, we do not have an analyst for the Nets Celtics series, so that will fall on us, and we will most certainly break down every square inch of this series, especially you as a Brooklyn Nets fan. So let me just ask you first, before we even utter the word Celtics, let's go start with the Nets, who many are saying are the title favorites. And many are saying if the Nets do not win a title either this year or next year, that this could be the worst experiment in NBA history, that they blew up the whole team for arguably the three of the best players on the planet right now in Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden. So, Joe, first of all, where do you see the Nets going in the playoffs, and especially in round one? Like, how do you think it's going to all work out?
I think it's going to be really, really hard. And this is not me, I try to put my bias aside when it comes to talking about the Nets as to avoid, being just sort of that homer, we're going to win it all, blah, blah, blah. I really honestly think that this is the best team in the NBA. And I do not see any team that could take them down so long as the Nets play like they can and they're supposed to and they have been. The offensive firepower that this team has is arguably the best of all time. You've got 3 Hall of Fame players, 2 MVPs. One, he hasn't won an MVP, but he's just about as good as you can be without being an MVP award. And Kyrie Irving is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, like Ryan said. Between Kyrie, Harden, and KD, there's no way to stop that offense. And that's just looking at the top 3 options. Because if you try to take one of them out of the game, if you double Kevin Durant, you're leaving one of James Harden or Kyrie Irving open. If you, by some miracle, shut all of them down and really just zone your defense on them, you've got Joe Harris, the best shooter in the NBA, waiting in the corner to shoot a 3. You've got Nick Claxton down low to catch a lob from James Harden. There's concerns about the defense with the Nets. Yes, they are 22nd in the NBA in defensive rating. The defense has been the Achilles heel. But my answer to that, whenever that topic's been brought up in discussions or, just when discussing about the Nets, I think that the best defense is a good offense because, yes, the Nets might get scored on. If they play the Sixers, Joel Embiid might average 50 points per game in that series. But guess what? Between Harden, KD, and Kyrie, collectively, they might average 80 points per game in a series. Their style of basketball is not we play really elite defense and we shut teams down on the defensive end. The way they've been playing is you can score on us, go ahead. But no matter how many points you drop on us, we're going to outshoot you. We're going to outscore you. And you can score 140 points against us, we'll drop 150. So, I mean, just the offensive loan, I think, is going to carry them throughout this playoffs. And I really don't think that there's a team that can keep up with them. I think there's 2 ways that I can see the Nets not winning the title this year. One is, Ryan actually said it earlier too, is due to injury. If one of the 3 goes down, it's going to spell a little bit of trouble. But again, that's sort of a you can apply that to any team. You know, if Nikola Jokic goes down with an injury, the Nuggets are kind of going to be in a tough spot. If LeBron gets hurt again, the Lakers are really going to be looking rough. So that's not really something net specific, but something that I think you've got to worry about for the Nets that could potentially, you know, derail them is just keeping the locker room stable, right? It's kind of a bit of an overblown narrative, I think, you know, and people say, you know, oh, you've got these superstars, you know, Eagles will clash, blah, 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 blah. That there's only one ball. That was the thing that when James Harden first got to the Nets, that was a huge concern. And that hasn't been a concern at all. I mean, the locker room has been great. The three have all meshed really well and played well together. I just think that they've got to make sure the Nets that they stay in their own heads and they don't let other teams get in their heads. They don't, you know, let themselves get too worked up if they drop a game, if something goes wrong in just, you know, game 2 of the series against Boston. As long as they just stay locked in and keep committed to the style of basketball they've been playing, they've had no issues so far as I can really see, that are damaging to winning a championship. So they just got to stay locked in, keep playing the way they've been playing. And I think that's going to spell success for them. And I think you're going to see them make a really, really deep run.
Yeah, I like a lot what you said, Joe. And it's just so hard to forecast with them that the big three's only played 8 regular season games together. And sort of how the Clippers last year with the whole Kawhi and Paul George, I'm not comparing the star power in any way, but just that they kind of figured out their chemistry right when the playoffs started, and just first round of the playoffs, that's kind of where they got their, you know, their feet on the ground and starting to mesh as teammates. So I just think there's just so much uncertainty with the Nets this year. I think that if they can't win a championship in the next 2 years with these guys, that it's just, there'd be no words to describe how disappointing it would be for Brooklyn and just the whole front office and staff in general if they can't win a championship with all this star power. But like we've seen in the NBA playoffs, defense is important. Can the Nets outscore every team? Very possible, but you still need a solid defense to really shut down, especially, you know, in the rebound battle. You know, you have James Harden, Kyrie in the backcourt. You have KD at the 3 or the 4, and then you got a, you know, like an older DeAndre Jordan. Can he guard Joel Embiid? Most likely not consistently. Joel Embiid might put up, you know, a 40-50 ball every game against them if the Sixers match up against the Nets. But before I ask about the Celtics series, I have one quick follow-up, just based off the stuff you've kind of alluded to, Joe, is about James Harden. And I think he's one of the most interesting players in the NBA, period. But especially when he came to Brooklyn, such an interesting move in that he was teaming up with, you know, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, 3 of the most, I would say, just interesting personalities in the league. That's the best way to put it. I can't even find a word to describe it. But we've seen down the stretch in years past in the West with the Rockets not being able to hit clutch shots down the stretch, kind of disappearing when it matters most. Joe, do you think it's a problem that he's had this kind of tendencies in the past, and now he's on a team where, again, he's the number 3 scoring option probably in most nights because he's more of a facilitator? If he doesn't hit shots down the stretch, do you think it will affect the Nets' playoff chances?
I'm not concerned at all with Harden being able to, you know, falter and not hit shots, because when the Nets are playing the style of basketball that they've been playing, that's been causing them to blow out teams and really win games, Harden's not someone who takes the bulk of the scoring. Like you said, he's the number 3 scoring option sometimes. He's really there to just be a facilitator and he's arguably the best passer in the entire NBA and one of the best playmakers of all time. He's just there to create shots, really. That's what his role has been. He hasn't been putting up those ridiculous 36 points per game to season type numbers that he had with Houston. Because with Houston, he had to be that number 1 scoring option. He didn't really have anyone around outside of that years when he had Chris Paul. So, I think that it's going to take sort of that pressure off him. And I don't think it's going to be a worry that, James Harden is sort of, faltering and having a bad night and, he can't handle the pressure, because the pressure's not really on him. I feel like it falls more on KD and Kyrie, because they're the guys who are going to take the bulk of the scoring opportunities. They're the guys who are going to be the leading shot takers. Harden's just there to, dish to them. He's going to obviously score. He's averaging 25 points per game on the year. It's not like he's, averaging 11. But, the spotlight, I feel like, in terms of scoring for him is not going to be on him that much. And so, if he has, an inefficient night and has a bad scoring night and goes, 8 for 24 and only drops, 20 points, I don't think it's really going to matter, because KD and Kyrie could combine for like 60, and that's just going to completely overshadow the fact that James Harden has a bad night. So because of the fact that they don't rely entirely and solely on James Harden scoring, I don't think you're going to see some of those issues that the Rockets had when James Harden doesn't score and, he can't handle the playoffs, that it spills, it just causes problems for the team. I don't think that's going to happen. And I also just want to touch on real quick, this is completely shifting gears, but bringing it back to, we had touched a little bit on the Nets defense. And you said, yes, that, it has been the Achilles heel for them so far this year. I honestly don't think it's as much of an issue, though, as people are saying, and not just because of the fact that they have a great offense. I want to bring forward a stat and actually first mention a player who, when you hear it, people might say, who? It's like some people might not even know who he is. If you know who he is, you might be kind of confused with what I'm about to say about him. But this man is arguably, outside of the big three, the most important player on the Nets, the most impactful player on the Nets. And I think throughout this playoff run that they might go on, he's going to be one of the biggest keys to their success. And that's Nicholas Claxton. He's a young guy, only in his second year, young center, but he has done absolute wonders for the Nets defense this year. I want to read you this stat. This is from Matt Brooks, who is a Nets beat writer. As of May 6th, the Nets posted a defensive rating that would rank first in the entire NBA when Nick Claxton is on the court. They are 27th in the league when he sits. So just the addition of Nick Claxton alone, he elevates their defense so much. I mean, he is the best defender on this entire team. And the big thing that contributes to that is that if you watch the games, he doesn't do a lot of things that show up in the stat sheet, right? He's having a really solid year and, averaging around 9 points per game. He's averaging around 2 blocks per game. But the biggest thing that he does that really helps the Nets on defense is that he is the most versatile defender on this team. Like I said, he's 6'11". He's a big man. He plays down low. But he is switchable. And in this era where, it's sort of positionless basketball is what we're transitioning to, he can guard 1 through 5. When the Nets played the Wizards, for example, during the regular season, Nick Claxton was the man they stuck on Bradley Beal for the entire game. It wasn't Kyrie. It wasn't Harden. It was Nick Claxton, the 6'11" second-year center. And it's Bradley Beal, so, nobody in the league really can shut down Bradley Beal. Prime Tony Allen might be the only person in NBA history to be able to do that, Gary Payton or Michael Jordan or something. But he played about just as well as you could play defense against Bradley Beal and made him work for buckets. Similarly, when the Nets played the Warriors, Nick Claxton was the man they stuck on Steph Curry. He is so versatile, and the fact that he can guard 1 through 5, the impact he makes on the defensive end when he's on the court, he elevates them so much that I think people are going to be shocked. And I think that, they might have a couple of games where they really lock in defensively and put up good defensive numbers and really shut down teams. And people will say, I thought the Nets were supposed to have a bad defense. What the heck's going on? If Nick Claxton can play the way he played and, be able to guard guys and just anchor that defense for them, I'm not too concerned with the defense being a problem. Like we said, it's the Nets had the number one defense in the NBA when Nick Claxton is on the court. Obviously, that's maybe not sustainable, but if they are about the 10th best defense in the NBA when Nick Claxton plays in this playoffs, that's all you need, partnered with that great offense. So the defense concerns are still a little bit overblown to me, especially because of Claxton. And, it's just going to be, at this point, you just got to sit back and watch the show because there's the question marks, there's, the high S for what this team's got to do, the pressure on them to not fail. Now's the time for them to, put those narratives to rest and just go and run with it and make a run and let's see what they do.
Yeah, excellent insight there, Joe. So much to break down, but we're going to bring our next beat reporter, Michael Daly, up in 1 minute. But just real quick, again, I think Nicholas Claxton, if DeAndre Jordan gets carved up in the post by any defender, Steve Nash is instantly going to bring him in and try to get some kind of defensive presence out on the floor. But when you're matching up now against the Boston Celtics, who they won the playing game against the Wizards, Jason Tatum had 50 points. Jaylen Brown is out. It's really the Jason Tatum show. We have, Kemba Walker is another supporting role, but it's going to be definitely an uphill battle against the Nets. No one's picking the Celtics to win this one, But I've been impressed with the Celtics for years, but now they're kind of at a stage where head coach Brad Stevens might be on his way out if they really can't make anything happen or at least be competitive in the Brooklyn series. So right before we bring Michael on, Joe, just give me just a quick prediction. Who's going to win Nets Celtics?
I'm picking the Nets to win. I really don't think there's any world where the Celtics can pull this out, especially the fact that they don't have Jaylen Brown, which is horrible to see because, I mean, if Jaylen Brown was playing, was healthy, and if he was playing in the series, I think it would be a lot closer. And I don't even think the Celtics would be a 7 seed if Jaylen Brown had stayed healthy throughout the stretch of the year. That being said, though, I'm still really, really excited about this series. And I think that even though the Nets, I think are going to win, and I really think it's going to be a relatively easy 4 or 5 game series, I think it's still going to be a really competitive and fun series to watch. Like, I'm getting echoes of in 2018 when the Nets played the Sixers in a 3v6 seed matchup in the first round. And the Sixers won in 5 games. They kind of just ran over the Nets. But every game was really sort of chippy and competitive, and it was really felt high intensity, and it was one of the most fun series to watch, despite the fact that it was a heavily Sixers that just dominated the Nets. And I think that's what this series is going to be like. I mean, one thing I want to touch on really quick, and I know Michael's about to come on, but the narratives in this are going to be really fun to watch. You know, the Nets and Celtics made that horrible trade from the Nets all those years back that set the Nets back. It set up the Celtics for the success they have now. Got them Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And also Kyrie Irving is coming back to Boston, who he left. And, you know, there are people in Boston were mad because, oh, Kyrie quit on the team. And, you know, he really caused a lot of issues in the locker room. And if Kyrie goes out and, like, what I'm rooting for, I want to see, like, Kyrie go out and drop 50 piece on the Celtics, because that would just be an awesome story to watch. And it would just be one of those moments where you're like, oh, my gosh, like, it's just going to get real high intensity, I feel like. So it's going to be fun to watch. I'm excited for it. But, I mean, we'll see what happens, and I've blabbered enough about this series. So let's move on to the next one with the Bucks, and we'll bring in our next guest.
Yeah, I just especially the Nets. I mean, I think there's just so much to talk about, and just having the Kyrie Irving again revenge game against his old team is definitely a storyline to watch, and definitely every one of our viewers should tune into from Game 1 to hopefully Game 7. But I don't know if it's even going to go that far. But now next up is our Milwaukee Bucks beat reporter, Michael Daly, who will be breaking down not only the Bucks this year, but their matchup against the Heat, who last year they did lose to in the NBA playoffs in the Eastern Conference Finals. And it's just so much to talk about. So, but first, before we even break into that stuff, Michael, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Jonathan. Joe, great to see you as well. It's good to be on with you guys.
Hey, Michael, how you doing tonight, man? I want to jump into it right away and ask you this one question that has been at the top of my mind, and I really want to hear your insight on it as a Bucks fan. The Bucks in recent years have kind of fell short a little bit, right? They've put together outstanding regular season teams. Giannis is a 2-time MVP the past 2 years, and yet they've sort of gotten to the late stages of the playoffs and they've faltered a little bit, and they haven't been able to take that next step and move on further. This year, though, I feel like there's just something different in the air about this Bucks team, and they're a team that I feel are dangerous and that they could really just rip off a huge run and make it to the finals and come out of the East. So I want to hear your perspective. Do you think there's anything different about this team? And if so, what is it that, you know, they sort of changed or adjusted a little bit that's going to make them take that next step when they get to the playoffs?
I would say what makes this team different than in the years past, guys, is that the Bucks, they know what it's like to lose, especially as the favorite. This year, what I think is helping them is that they're coming in as the 3rd overall seed, which is something, it was probably most similar to 2018 when they lost to the Celtics. They really weren't expected to go too far, but that loss to the Celtics was still surprising. And then if you flip forward a year to 2019 against the Toronto Raptors, when they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals after leading 2-0, I think that ruined their entire world, because in 2019, that was their best chance to make the finals, because at that time, Kyrie, KD, they were not a part of the Nets. And even last year's team, that was probably their next best chance to make the finals. But this year, I think what helps them is that the pressure isn't as much as it is on a team like Philadelphia and Brooklyn, because those are the 2 teams that I think everyone expects to get out. For the Bucks, you really, as cliche as this is to say, you have to take it one series at a time, because that could be all. I think what's helping this team now, though, is that they already played the Miami Heat in the playoffs, and they have been used to this before. 2018, they lost to the Celtics. 2019, they got matched up against the Celtics again and beat them. So they know what it's like to lose to a team one year, play them the next year when everyone is picking against the Milwaukee Bucks because they're just saying, oh, here's the same old Bucks, and then they surprise everybody. So this could happen again.
Yeah, I like what you said, Michael, that, they're a 3 seed, but they're not the favorites. And I feel like the last 3 or 4 years, they've always been either the 1 or 2 seed, it's seemingly like. And we expect, Giannis has won 2 MVPs. Everyone's just expecting him to dominate and just destroy the competition throughout all the rounds of the playoffs. And now this year, the regular season, they did win the season series against the Heat 2-1, but it was kind of hard to judge because Jimmy Butler was battling injuries. But, we saw last year Bam Adebayo took out Giannis, or not necessarily took out, but limited Giannis. And now it's going to be, it seems like a matter of who's going to step up outside of him. Is Chris Middleton really going to take another step up and be that scoring option? They bring in Drew Holiday, who's been a perfect, dynamic two-way threat, both offensively and defensively. So my question to you is, like, just against the Heat, if they could beat them, and just going forward, if they can make a finals run, because I think they could steal it this year, to be honest. I think if the Sixers and Nets either one of them get knocked out, they match up well against teams in the West that could potentially come out. I think the Bucks could go all the way this year potentially. But my question to you is, let's say a team like the Heat locks up Giannis again, and he is restricted to maybe 20 points a game, which is obviously great for anyone, but human for him. We're used to, even more scoring. Do you think players like Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday will step up and become viable scoring options, especially in the postseason, where they might have to carry them in a couple of games?
I definitely think they can, because the difference between this year's Bucks squad and last year's is that they have their top 3 scorers locked down pat. And by that, I mean they have Giannis, Chris Middleton, and Drew Holiday. Last year, the expectation was either Brook Lopez or Eric Bledsoe would be that third option. And unfortunately, Eric Bledsoe definitely wasn't the third option, because what the Heat would do, they would force Giannis outside by double teaming him and making life miserable that he couldn't really enter into the paint. He would kick it out. And the offense, what the Bucks tried to do last year was run it through Eric Bledsoe. And he struggled with that, especially shooting. A lot of times he would take errant threes and he would just miss them. At least with Drew Holiday, he's averaging 17 points a game. He knows what it's like to lead an offense. And another thing that's helpful as well, I don't know, and I'm not trying to be biased here, I don't know if there's a more complete defensive team in the NBA. And that's what you need, especially in a series that will be a slog. I expect this to go a minimum of 6 games, whichever way it goes. I think it's going 6 games. And you need defense, because that was something they also struggled with last year, where Bam Adebayo had his way down low, just got rebounds and was just putting them up and in. I think this go around, having someone like Brook Lopez, who, yes, last year he was a all defensive player, it still helps having that extra experience going up against the Heat with him down low. But Drew Holiday, at least for my money, I think he might be the best defensive guard in the entire NBA, because you can match him up 1 to 3 on a roster and he has them locked down. So that's what's going to help. And the reason why I keep bringing up Drew Holiday, not only can he do it on the defensive end, but like I talked about just a few minutes ago, offensively, he's that guy that if Giannis is struggling, you can go to him, because he has playoff experience with the New Orleans Pelicans as well as the Philadelphia 76ers. So this is a guy, the moment will not be too big for him. And Chris Middleton against the Heat on Saturday had 21 points. Giannis had 15, although he had 9 rebounds, which wasn't bad. Giannis was relatively shut down in that game. Chris Middleton had 21 points. Expect for Chris Middleton to try to take over when Giannis is not able to, or if Giannis is not able to.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there, Michael. I mean, Chris Middleton, he's an all-star player, and he's one of the more underrated players in the league. And I feel like, because he's a legitimate all-star he's a number 2 option on a top 3 playoff team. And I feel like he just doesn't get the respect he deserves. And so I'm absolutely expecting him to really, really step up, and looking for a strong series from him. This is kind of shifting gears a little bit, still staying on topic with the Bucks. And it has to do with their coaching. and specifically Coach Bud, Mike Budenholzer. And there's been kind of an interesting dialogue surrounding him this season. There's been some people calling for his head, saying that he should be fired, that he's sort of on the hot seat. Other people saying, no, he's still one of the better coaches in the NBA. I want to hear your opinion on that. Do you think that maybe, if they really don't make another deep run this year, is it time to move on from Coach Bud, or do you think he's really the best option they're going to have, and they should just stick with him and try to get a championship under him?
If they lose in the first round, I think he's out because the Bucks, they're in win now mode, especially although Giannis signed that 5-year extension. If they lose, do not be surprised if he asks for a trade. Maybe not this summer, but down the line, because Giannis wants to win. Yes, he loves Milwaukee, but he prioritizes winning. So I think it all depends on how this first round goes. If the Bucks are able to get past the Heat, which could happen, I think Mike Budenholzer, regardless of what happens in the other rounds, I think he keeps his job. I compare Mike Budenholzer a lot to Terry Stotts because Terry Stotts is getting a lot of same treatment in Portland. There have been reports out that, barring a miracle, Terry Stotts is going to be let go at the end of the season for the Portland Trailblazers. I don't think it's as dire for Mike Budenholzer, but the seat is definitely warm for him. And I think it's just a matter of time for Mike Budenholzer to really figure out what direction he wants this team to go, because there were some rumors and chirping that when they lost to the Heat last year, he was gone, but they retained him. They kept him. If that happens again this year, I don't know. But look, if this team finds a way to get to the NBA Finals, which I think some people, not that they expect, but it is a possibility, then I think Mike Budenholzer might have secured his job for the next 3 to 4 years. But it all comes back to the first round series. Although I like Mike Budenholzer a lot, I still wish the Milwaukee Bucks had Jason Kidd as their head coach. And the reason why, I thought he worked very well with Giannis. Mike Budenholzer, yes, he has experience coaching under Greg Popovich and then coaching his own team with the Atlanta Hawks, but Jason Kidd in his own right was a superstar player. And he even coached superstar players. Look at the Brooklyn Nets in 2013. He coached Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, all of those guys, Joe Johnson. And then with the Milwaukee Bucks, he really took a guy like Giannis and even Jabari Parker before Giannis. He took those two guys under his wing and then eventually Chris Middleton. But there was just some friction between the Lazary ownership and the front office and Jason Kidd that it didn't work out. But I thought Jason Kidd was the right guy for the job. Mike Budenholzer, I don't know if he's as good of a fit as Jason Kidd was, just because when it comes down to the big moments, I think he likes to take the ball out of Giannis's hand a little bit too much. And he tries to make Giannis into a facilitator, which I don't always agree with, because Giannis is best when he's going downhill and attacking the basket. That's not always the case with Mike Budenholzer. So I think there are a few adjustments that he needs to make, especially if this team wants to go on a run and keep his job.
And Mike, I like what you said about, obviously Mike Budenholzer is in a very difficult situation, I think, with this postseason, because I think if the Bucks do get bounced, he will be out. I think a lot of us can agree on that. That's the consensus at this point. And when you talk about kind of Giannis's play style, where he's best out in transition, the Bucks are a great transition offense team. Are they going to be able to replicate, or Miami Heat can be able to replicate the defense on Giannis that caused them so much success? Jay Crowder isn't there on the Heat anymore, who did guard Giannis a lot, and now he's out in Phoenix. And, Trevor Ariza, Andre Iguodala, can those two veterans clamp him down, so to say? So a lot remains to be seen with that. But my last question to you, Michael, before you head out, is just about everything in general. And it's a two-parter, and we're asking this for all of our analysts. And I'll tell you what Ryan Henry said after you give your answers. So my first question out of the two is, who is your pick for MVP? I know Giannis was in the top 5 of the finalists, but the top 3 is Steph Curry, Nikola Jokic, and my mind is blanking, but those are the consensus too. And Joel Embiid. Sorry, my mind is blanking with that. And my second question is, what is your prediction for the NBA Finals? What are the two teams from the East and the West? Do you think the Bucks will be there? And who's your champion?
So I will say my MVP is Nikola Jokic, because I know the sexy pick right now is Stephen Curry, but when you talk about most valuable, yes, Stephen Curry is a big reason why the Warriors are where they are. in the 8th seed and hoping to make the playoffs after tonight. But Nikola Jokic, the way he's able to dominate the game and really dominate the ball as a 6'11 point guard, I don't think we've ever seen it. And to me, he's the closest thing to a hybrid of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson that we have ever seen in the NBA. His ability to he's not a muscular guy whatsoever, but able to throw his weight around and just capture rebounds like it's no one's business. The way he's able to score, shoot, and pass the ball. If I'm looking at the last 10 years in the NBA, the best two passing big men, Nikola Jokic, Kevin Love. Kevin Love does not get enough credit for how well he is at passing, but I think Nikola Jokic blows him out in terms of skill passing as a big man. So that's my long-winded answer for MVP, Nikola Jokic. And then to win it all, to get to the NBA Finals, I have the Utah Jazz and the Philadelphia 76ers getting out. I'll say for the Utah Jazz, the reason why I think they are going to get in is because of the seeding. The Los Angeles Lakers, yes, they are the 7th seed, and I think they're going to possibly, depending on the seeding, they could make the conference finals. If they were the 8th seed, I think they would have no chance because I think the Jazz, just between a 1 and an 8, it's a little different, but I do think the Jazz could go on a run. And then the Sixers, we have seen what the Sixers' big three looks like all together with Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, and obviously an MVP candidate, Joel Embiid. The Brooklyn Nets, you don't really know what you're getting. Yes, you know all three of them together are great, but defensively, there's just a lot of holes that I do not like if I'm a Brooklyn Nets fan. So I think the Philadelphia 76ers will get to the finals. And then I'm actually going to pick the Philadelphia 76ers to be the NBA champion. I know it's a little bit of a different pick. I feel like everyone has either the Lakers or the Nets in there, but I have the Sixers winning it all.
Yeah, I think especially, I mean, from earlier that we've heard from Mr. Ryan Henry before. He's a Sixers fan, and he was actually much more down on the team than you are giving him praise to, which he'd like to hear. He also had Nikola Jokic, and he actually did not have the Sixers. He had the Nets going farther. But I just think, again, Joe's a Nets fan, and he'll kind of finish it up real quick. We think like the Nets defense, they're going to outscore teams, each and every game. For my pick, which I'll get into later on, I just do think the Sixers, this is their year, just based all across the table, just the way they've been playing. Again, we have seen more of the Sixers' big three. I really like Doc Rivers. I think they all have something to prove in this playoff run. There's definitely a lot to talk about with the Sixers. But Joe, just real quick before we wish Michael goodbye, what are some of your thoughts about some of his picks for MVP and the NBA champion?
I mean, I definitely like the Sixers pick. I feel like it's kind of a contrarian one. Like the Nets have very heavy favorites, and I mean, the concerns that you're putting forth are real, and especially from the perspective of a Nets fan, the fact that we haven't really seen them together, Kyrie Harden, KD, we haven't seen them together that much. There's concerns that maybe they won't mesh that well. I think they're a little bit overblown, and I think the three of them have enough talent there that they're going to be able to figure out and get it working. But the other, I really love your Utah Jazz pick, and I think they're a team that's getting slept on a lot by a lot of people around the NBA. And we'll have more on the Utah Jazz from yourself, Michael, later on in the show. He'll be back on to join us to help break down their first round series. So thank you so much for everything you did for this round recap, Michael, and we'll see you later tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. See you guys in about 20 minutes.
Yep, see you in a little bit, Michael. Yep, again, that was Michael Daly, who will be joining us a little later when we break down the Western Conference teams, specifically the Utah Jazz and, the winner of the Warriors and Grizzlies game. But a lot to talk about the Jazz. Definitely very intriguing. But now we're going to stick in the East, and our next beat reporter is up, Joel Moran, who will be breaking down the Knicks and Hawks series. And there's so much to talk about. Again, New York is back, Knicks basketball is back. So exciting. MSG is going to be rocking on Sunday and going forward. It's just great that there's the comments, not misconception, but comment just that the NBA is better with the Knicks being a better team. It's more popular, I feel like, and it just brings so much more attention that a big market is, on the rise, and there's so much to talk about. But before we get into that, Joel Moran is on the call now. So first, Joel, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great.
Hey, Joel, how you doing? I want to jump into this really, really quickly and get immediate thoughts on this question. The Knicks, they are one of the best stories in the entire NBA this year, I feel like. I mean, they've been kind of the laughingstock of the league for the past couple of years, and they've just been terrible. And, losing players like Porzingis and, not being able to make runs with Carmelo Anthony, it just looked like an absolute mess. And this year, the future did look bright for them. They've got RJ Barrett now. He's a really good young star. And, people were kind of expecting that, they could push for one of those lower 7-8 seed teams. But, I mean, they really shattered all expectations and came out of nowhere. And they're the 4 seed in the East now. I mean, just an incredible story, nobody saw it coming, I feel like, really, the success that they've had. So is there something that you can pinpoint to the reason why they made it this far and why they've just came out of the gates just blazing and blowing everyone's expectations away?
Yeah, it's Tom Thibodeau. I mean, Tom Thibodeau has been the culture changer with the Knicks right now. He's one of the main reasons why Julius Randle is playing so well on defense. We have the best defense in terms of opponents' points per game. So he's changed our defense in that way. And it was such a major upgrade from going from David Fisdale and Mike Miller to now going to Tom Thibodeau. And the entire team is playing better. RJ Barrett made that second-year leap. Julius Randle made that all-NBA leap. And I think trading for Derrick Rose at the deadline was also one of the hugest boosts to our team. He has the highest plus-minus on the Knicks since getting traded, so he has made a huge impact. And I just think overall it's been Tiz, but I think it's also been the development of these younger players and especially Julius Randle.
Yeah, Joel, I love you got the Julius Randle jersey in the background, repping that. If not for some stellar performances from some of the best in the NBA this year, that will ask you a little bit about your MVP pick. Julius Randle could have been a potential MVP candidate this year with the way he's playing, the way he turned the whole franchise around. People at MSU, or there were no fans last year, but he was getting booed, and now turning into MVP chance. I think it's just something remarkable and something only you can see in a big market sports team. And I think it's just something so interesting to talk about. But before we kind of dive into the Knicks-Hawks series, which the Knicks actually swept them this season, but they were definitely intriguing matchups, I just want to ask you a question that kind of relates to the series, but just overall for the rest of the playoffs, if the Knicks do somehow go on a magical run, as the 4 seed. Obviously, Julius Randle is the bona fide star of the Knicks. He averaged 24 points per game all season long. He is the number 1 scoring threat. Teams will be building their defenses around him. And Coach Tom Thibodeau knows that if the Knicks have any shot of winning, he's got to, go off potentially for career highs, especially if they match up with the Sixers in the second round, if they beat the Hawks. So now, outside of Julius Randle, if he isn't the player that he has been all season long, there's other scoring options. RJ Barrett is his almost Batman to his Robin, where he has had a fantastic sophomore year season. There's so many other options. But just real quick, who do you see as their bona fide number 2 scoring option if Julius Randle cannot deliver? It could be even a Derrick Rose off the bench as a possible 6-man. Just who do you think is going to be someone for them to always rely on in scoring and is primed for a big playoff run?
I think the obvious pick would be RJ Barrett because he's a second leading scorer on the team right now. But just watching the Knicks, I think this entire year has been such a team effort that if Julius Randle does start to get doubled, he's going to kick it out to shooters like Reggie Bullock, who's been huge this season, averaging double figures. RJ Barrett has been a much improved 3-point shooter. He's shooting near like 40% right now. And then you have off the bench, you have Derrick Rose and Immanuel Quickley, who can both give you 15-plus points per game off the bench. So I think it's going to be a collective effort from everybody if Julius Randle starts to face a bunch of doubles.
Yeah, and touching more a little bit on Julius Randle, I mean, the leap he made was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, he has to be like a unanimous most improved player this year. Just a ridiculous leap. And Joel, for those of you who don't know, I mean, this man is one of the best social media follows out there amongst the WW sports staff and in just sports media in general, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, whatever it is. But some of the things that, I've seen you talk about and post about is that you like to really get into film and, sort of analyze what players are doing, what makes them click. So this is sort of a 2-part question, which is, A, have you been able to jump in and look at what Julius Randle has been doing? And even if you haven't, just from watching games in general, what do you think has been the big thing for him this year that's allowed him to make that leap from just being sort of a middling, okay, he's a solid power forward to now he's an all NBA level potential MVP candidate type player who can carry a team?
For one, I appreciate the compliment a lot, and two, I think Julius Randle has been a couple things. I'm gonna make a joke here. One of them has been he doesn't spin as much. Last year, I mean, him spinning was just such a headache all the time. But it's really been his shooting. Last year he shot 26% from the three. Now he's shooting 40% from three. I mean, that's a major jump. I also think he's been much more patient with his game in picking his spots. He's more of a faithful four. I know people like to classify him as a bully ball player, kind of like a Zach Randolph type, but I don't see that. He's much of a finesse four. He can bully down low, but I think his game went from that to now being a much more all-around player, being able to step out, shoot threes consistently, being able to shoot fadeaway mid-range shots from the post. Like he's just added so much to his game, and I think his ball handling also has improved significantly.
Yeah, as a fellow Knicks fan, I could definitely reiterate that he was almost spinning like a top most of the time, especially last year, just seeing him on the offensive end. And going into this year where he can, he could shoot, he can make you pay from three, career numbers there, and also bowling down low and just being just so dominant, especially against some of the best defenses in the entire NBA. But now kind of shifting, well, still with Julius Randle, but now with the Atlanta Hawks, who, have been a surprise this year as well. They're back in the playoffs. Trae Young has led, the Atlanta Hawks there. It's been their first time since 2017. They're one of the best offensive scoring teams. They have a top 10 offense. They have arguably 5 different scorers that can, really take over a game, so to say, on the Hawks. And they're more the offensive dynamo, while the Knicks are the defensive, strong up front kind of matchup. So just off the top of your head, what do you think is like one key for each team to do to kind of overtake the other? Just because it's almost like the clash of offense and defensive titans.
The Hawks have to score more. That's really it. And the Knicks, I think they just have to get going from three. I mean, they can't have inefficient games. The Hawks are so great offensively, and one of the tougher matchups is going to be Trae Young. I mean, Trae Young obviously I think he's the best player in the series. I know Julius Randle's having a great year, but I think the best player in the series is Trae Young. And the Knicks' biggest weakness is that point guard position. Thibodeau has a really tough thing to do and try to figure out in terms of, do you start Elfrid Payton to match up with Trae Young, or do you start maybe a Frank Ntilikina to play defense on Trae Young? It's going to be a really tough task, but I think Thibodeau will figure it out.
And touching a little bit more on the Hawks, I think a big reason that the Hawks have made it so far this year, and a huge story about them throughout the year, was the coaching changes they made. They started off the season with Lloyd Pierce, went 14-20 under him, and made the decision that we're going to fire him. And they went to Nate McMillan, who, since he's gotten there, I mean, he's completely turned that team around. They've gone 27-11 under McMillan this year. It's taken them up into that 5 seed. And so today, actually, just a couple hours earlier, Shams reported that the Hawks are sort of planning that they want to roll with McMillan. So what do you think he's done, to really switch the narrative of the Hawks, take them from a lower lottery type team to being a 5 seed? And do you think it's the right move to continue to roll with McMillan for the future?
I think there was a bunch of things that went into play. When Nate McMillan first got the job, the Hawks had a stretch of games where they didn't face very tough opponents. So that helped the Hawks gain some chemistry. And then they started to get healthy. I mean, with Lloyd Pierce earlier in the season, the Hawks were the 5th seed as well, and they were healthy. So it was really just about their health. I think Nate McMillan has done a lot in terms of getting the offense to not be so Trae Young centric as it was before. You can see it, and you can see that the players are motivated. They really didn't vibe with Lloyd Pierce that much. Nate McMillan came and, he really got the team on track and to be on the same page. Trae Young has vouched for him. And all around, I do think it's the right decision. I mean, he's proven himself. Not bringing him back next year when the team is behind him, when he's had this great of a record, it would just be a shame for him not to be back.
Yeah, it was definitely some just interesting news to come out of that Nate McMillan would make a comment like that, which I think was just completely unnecessary. The Knicks had not been in the playoffs since 2013, and just a matter of just, it's going to be great playoff basketball. The Knicks have had 2 of their best, I think, offensive performances of the year against the Hawks earlier this season. And it's just been so interesting to see them just develop. I think it's going to be a rivalry for years to come with 2 of the young teams in the East. Definitely a lot to look out for. But before I ask you our kind of question we've been asking all of our analysts about your MVP and finals pick, I just have one more question just about the Knicks in general, as a fellow Knicks fan. again, it's so exciting that they're back, and I know the Knicks faithful are just praying that they can at least win the first round. The second round, they're kind of playing with house money. But what is your prediction for this series and how many games for each team? And do you think the Knicks could go on a run even further?
Knicks in 6. The Knicks will win in 6 games, and the reason why is because I think we're going to play great defensively, which is huge. Randall has averaged 37 points per game against the Atlanta Hawks. And Ned McMillan, as great as he has been this season, he has been a first-round exit coach wherever he's been, whether it's been Indiana, where they've gotten swept, whether it's been Portland, like in 2008, in that time frame. He's always been a first-round exit. So I'm expecting that to continue now, and the Knicks getting out of the first round in 6 games.
Yeah, I really hope so too. I mean, I just find it so hard to see the Knicks lose this series, especially with the momentum they've been having, especially in the last part of the regular season where they're playing all these West Conference Titans, playing tough with a bunch of them, even beating a couple of them. I think there's definitely been something interesting for just New York basketball in general. The city's excited. I think the whole league is excited just at the fact, the Knicks and the Nets, two of, the New York teams are good. The Lakers and the Clippers, just all the big market teams are in, and they're all locked and loaded for the postseason. But now I'll ask my kind of doubleheader, and I'll tell you what our other analysts said right after you give your answers. So first, obviously, Julius Randle, unfortunately, is not in the top 5 of the MVP voting. We wish, and I'm sure for the rest of the season, that he would be. But my first question out of the two is, who is your pick for MVP out of the 3 main candidates of Curry, Jokic, and Embiid? And what is your NBA Finals 2 teams and the winner?
First of all, I want to say I'm so glad Chris Paul is out of the top 3. Oh my gosh, I would have had a heart attack. But I think the winner is Nikola Jokic, like no doubt about it. Nikola Jokic is the winner. It should go to him. I have a feeling that he's going to get snubbed. That's just my gut feeling. And I think it might be a surprise and people might pick Curry, which I think would be a travesty because they were just in a playing game. But I hope it is Jokic. And my 2 final picks, I think it's going to be the Brooklyn Nets and it's going to be the Lakers coming out of the West. And I have the Nets winning that in 6 or 7, one of those.
Yeah, I mean, the Lakers are going to be an interesting team to watch for because I mean, like for like the good like 2/3 of the season, I mean, it was like undisputed, like yeah, they're going to make the finals, and they faltered a little bit, and now they're at the 7th seed. But I mean, I do like the pick, and being a Nets fan, I of course love that you're picking us to go and take down the Lakers. But I mean, it's going to be a really really fun postseason to watch, and we thank you so much, Joel, for everything you've done here tonight. You're the absolute GOAT. Thank you so much for your analysis. We'll catch you around, man.
All right, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joel, for all your time and your expert insight. So again, if you have not followed Joel already, follow him on Twitter at Joel V. Moran. And his podcast, Pick a Side Podcast, is one of the best, I think, in the sports media world right now.
No doubt.
I think we talked about it. I think it'll blow up at some point. He's already had some pretty cool interactions from some famous people. And I just think some of the content he puts out there is absolutely phenomenal. But there's definitely just so much to break down. Again, and we're going to have Michael Daly just in a couple of minutes. But before we get him on, I kind of just want to give one more point about the Knicks, just kind of give my little spiel about them. I just think regardless of if the Knicks even win the series, I just think this year was a complete success across the board. The fact that Thibodeau and Randall have completely changed the culture of New York is something that is just unheard of, in previous years since the Carmelo Anthony era. And I think arguably the Knicks have the best chemistry on paper. Just with everyone on this team, they just play so well as a unit, and that's so important when it comes down to the playoffs, which might be a problem for the Nets, but also might not be because of the star power. But some people have argued that the Knicks are still not an appealing destination for a free agent, arguably even because of Tom Thibodeau. I think Stephen A's even said that in the past. I disagree. I think that the notion that the Knicks have been this, sort of bum team that they don't like the ownership, they don't like the front office, they want to steer clear from the New York pressures. I just think that it's officially ended. I think that the years of suffering of Knicks fans, I think, is over, regardless of if they get even swept in the first round, which I don't think they will. But I just think that this is it. This is finally a place where they could build upon. Even if they don't win, they still have a decent draft pick regardless. I think, there's a lot of good players in this upcoming draft, especially towards the end of the first round. They can add another player. They could bring in a big-time free agent. If I'm a free agent, I want to play with Julius Randle and, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly, maybe even finding a number 2 to Randle, even someone even better, that would have given RJ Barrett even less pressure to flourish as a number 2 scoring option to Randall. Emmanuel quickly has been absolutely phenomenal this year, and I was so highly. As soon as I saw the Knicks drafted him, I actually wrote an article for WSU, saying how effective a player he was, and it was great to see him do even better than what I predicted. But Joe, I'll just ask you before we bring Michael back on for the West. Do you think that this Knicks team is for real? Like I've been saying, I'm not just saying it as a fan. I'm just saying it as a NBA, NBA fan expert. Obviously, I'm not like a professional expert, but just watching the NBA for many years of my life and seeing the Knicks be absolutely atrocious for many years of my life, and not wanting to turn them on TV sometimes, but still fighting the urge and doing it. Just to listen to Mike Breen and Walt Frazier call the game, I'm just more than ecstatic for Sunday. So just want to hear what you think.
Yeah, no, the Knicks are for real. Like, I mean, they're really have such a solid foundation to build on. And this is me drawing from my perspective as a Nets fan. I remember even earlier in the year and throughout this whole year, this Knicks team reminded me so much of the D'Angelo Russell Nets team in I think it was 2018, 2019, that season, where they weren't elite, right? They're not a top tier championship contender, but you could see the foundation was there. The culture changed. They had a lot of good young pieces, and they started to put it together. And that's the same thing that the Knicks are doing this year. I mean, that's I think the biggest thing is that they're not some sort of like fluky, they just got hot and had a good season. I mean, the people that are being impact players for them are guys who are going to be around for a long time. RJ Barrett, who's an incredibly young guy and only in his second year, and he's already number 2 option on a number 4 seed in the NBA. Julius Randle is someone who was a high lottery draft pick, and he's always had really sky high potential. And this is really the first time he's got the opportunity to capitalize that and lead a team. And we're now seeing what he can do when he plays like how he was supposed to when he first got drafted. So, I mean, between all the talent there, and Emmanuel quickly too, I mean, he's just another really great young piece. The core that they have is going to be around for a couple of years. And I don't see this as anything of like a fluke. I see this as, like RJ Barrett. It's just him taking that second step in his second year. It's Julius Randle not just having, a random hot season. It's him really coming into his own as a player and getting the opportunity to lead a team. And so I think that they're going to be around for a while. And you said the free agent destination thing. And that's an incredibly scary thing to think about if you're not a Knicks fan, and you're another team that's trying to gun for a free agent. If you have a superstar that's hitting free agency, because the Knicks have always been sort of in that conversation, right? For the past couple of years, when LeBron hit free agency, it was LeBron's coming to the Knicks. There was obviously Katie and Kyrie. Everybody thought they were going to the Knicks.
I know.
Yeah, but I mean, such a big part of that is just because of the fact that they're such a huge team. They're such a huge market team. MSG is the mecca of basketball. And the fact that they were always still in conversation and still sort of in talks with these big name free agents, with how absolutely horrible they were in the past, the fact that now they have an actual legitimate, really good team, a really solid foundation, I think it's going to make it so much more attractive to free agents. And if they get someone, like if Kawhi Leonard opts out this year and he decides, I want to go team up with Randall and Barrett in New York, that's going to be a really, really good team. Like, that's going to be a top 2 team in the East. If they get any sort of superstar at free agency, they're going to be ridiculously good. And that's something, if you're a Knicks fan, you have to be excited about that. It's going to be just, it's such a good time to be a Knicks fan, New York sports fan in general. I mean, all the sports are blossoming. But I mean, like you said when Joel was on, I mean, the NBA is better when the Knicks are good. And I'm not going to say because I'm a Nets fan that, blah, 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 and discredit the Knicks. No, that's really the truth. I mean, the Knicks are one of the most popular teams in basketball, in sports, period. The fans are some of the most loyal fans I know. I mean, you, Jonathan, I know a ton of other Knicks fans too, who their loyalty, I mean, I have to give them a round of applause because they stuck through some absolutely horrendous years. It's paying off. Just everything about the Knicks is just going to be so much fun to watch as a basketball fan. They're going to bring in so many new fans to the sport, I feel like, and it's just going to be great for the league. And it's just a really, really, really exciting time. And that's in a word, exciting. That's all you can really say about it.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say this because, like, I like the Nets, excuse me, And I think Harden, Kyrie, and KD are three of the most talented players I think to ever play among the all-time greats. But I really was not a fan of the comments that they've kindly made about the Knicks in the past, especially KD, where they're basically, putting down the Knicks and just obviously there's been this stigma for so long that the Knicks have been, right now they're inferior to the Nets talent-wise, and that the Nets are the title contenders, and that Brooklyn is kind of taken over New York and that whole thing. But I just think what the Knicks have done this year, I mean, again, I know for the ticket prices, just no matter if you're a Knicks or Nets fan, you're going to realize Madison Square Garden is going to have more fans than Barclays Center. And, I know the Nets are struggling actually to put people in the seats right now. And they're doing all these I've seen, I have backed up information that, no, I'm not completely, no, I'm just saying that no matter who the Nets get, this is not a hot take. I'm just saying this. The Knicks will, just because of their name and the past, and Madison Square Garden will put more seats in an arena. I'm not saying that they're a better team than the Nets. I think the Nets could win. I think the Nets are going to possibly win the finals this year. But I just think that no matter who the Nets get, I still think that, they can. I think that both teams could be maybe even side by side with popularity. I'm not saying talent or anything. Nets obviously win, but that's why I was like, I know, make sure you're a little defensive there. I'm just saying that I just think that the Knicks are not lower than the Nets in any way.
No, absolutely not.
Besides talent. And that's reasonable to say for anyone, because for so many years, the Knicks have been terrible. And even when the Carmelo Anthony era, he was a star, and just seeing them do well in the playoffs. But I just think that if the Knicks are good, that no matter if the Nets had 8 All-Stars, which they almost pulled off, I think that they're both around the same level of popularity. And, Madison Square Garden, 15,000 people in the largest indoor gathering in New York since the pandemic started. People are going to be going crazy in that game. But
Hey, Barclays Center has 13,000 for game 1, so don't
that's true.
fill an arena too. But
No, that's true.
It would be ridiculous to say that the Knicks are New York's team. The Nets are the little brother team. I don't buy stock into that. I don't really care about that. But it is the truth. If New York is a Knicks town, it's become a little bit more of a Nets town recently.
I agree.
Good. But again, that's the whole thing. Why it's so exciting that the Knicks are becoming good is because when the Knicks are good, the Knicks fandom is unreal. And we haven't seen that insane, Knicks fans coming out of the woodwork, coming out and selling out MSG for real. I mean, we saw it when Carmelo was there for a little bit, but even before that, the last time that it was really crazy Knicks fandom was the 90s when they had Patrick Ewing.
Patrick Ewing jersey. That's
exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, if that comes back and again, we just say it again, the NBA is better when the Knicks are good because it brings out some of the most passionate fans in the entire NBA and the entirety of sports. So it's a fun time in New York sports for the Knicks.
Yeah, I think for both. I mean, I wish that they could be matched up against each other this year. It'd be just so great. I think just for the sport in general in the NBA, where they've had, the ratings dip, and a lot of sports have had ratings dip, just having that would be spectacular. But let's move away from our little New York talk. We could do a whole 4-hour show just breaking down Knicks and Nets basketball. Let's shift back to the Western Conference, and we'll be bringing back Michael Daly, who did an unbelievable job breaking down the Bucks for us. But he will be joining us in a few moments right now, and the Utah Jazz, which he will be beat reporting now as the team. So, Michael, you are back. How are you doing from the last 20 minutes since we last spoke to you?
I'm doing great, guys. And I actually really liked your conversation about the Knicks because I think this is the year that they can catch a lot of people by surprise. I know 2013, the expectation was that they were going to make the Eastern Conference Finals. They were a game away from that. This year, I think they could do a lot of damage. So that's my piece, and that's my take on the Knicks.
Yeah, long time no see, Michael, but we're back here to help break down this Jazz series. And first thing I want to ask you is the Jazz, I feel like they're a team that has been counted out by a lot of people just almost subconsciously. They're the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. They are one of the best teams in the NBA, yet I don't see or hear a lot of people picking them to go to the finals. You hear a lot of, it's going to be the Lakers and it's going to be the Clippers and it's going to be the Nuggets, because they've got that star power, right? You've got Hall of Fame level top 2 superstar talents in LeBron and Kawhi and Nikola Jokic leading those teams. Whereas the Jazz sort of have a different element of basketball that they play. They focus a lot on more of a team-centric basketball. They don't have a top-tier superstar just carrying them night in and night out and dropping all the points for them. They just play really well together. And I feel like people see that and just immediately discount that and say, well, no, you need superstars to win an NBA championship. But I mean, I don't really feel that way. And I want to hear what you think. Like, I mean, do you think that that's sort of just a overblown and kind of stupid narrative that no, they really still can win with the way they play?
You know why people don't give the Utah Jazz enough credit? Because they play in Salt Lake City, Utah. I don't know if you guys have ever been there. I've never been there, but it's not really a hotbed, especially in the summer. If anything, it's more so a skiing resort, but it's not LA, it's not New York. But even if you look at the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, John Stockton, Karl Malone, Darren Williams, Carlos Boozer, when those two groups of duos, you could say, were together, even then, I don't think they were given enough credit, because if you look at the 90s, they were outshined by the Bulls. And even in the West in the 90s was a gauntlet. So yes, Utah got there 2 years in a row, which was a feat only the Lakers had done in the early 90s. But still, I don't think they were given nearly enough credit. And then Carlos Boozer, Darren Williams, I think what's happening now is the same thing that has happened to those guys with Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert. Donovan Mitchell is not talked about enough in terms of being a game changer. That guy coming out of Louisville, he was slept on a lot, and he even had reservations about even going to the NBA. Chris Paul was really the player that talked him in to going and entering into the draft portal. If not, he might have stayed another year at Louisville. Luckily, he didn't with all the scandals. That's neither here nor there. But this guy, the moment he set foot in Salt Lake City, the Utah Jazz were already a playoff team in 2017 with Gordon Hayward, but he made them exponentially better because they were able to run through him as a two guard. And I mean, he's really taken this team over. Another thing I want to say, though, in terms of can this team win, even though they don't have a LeBron James or a bona fide superstar, they can because of their coaching. Quinn Snyder, and I don't mean to jump on you guys if you guys are going to ask this question, but for me, he's the coach of the year. The reason why he is the coach of the year, and it's not Monty Williams, it's not Tom Thibodeau, is because in the West, the fact that you can jump up several seeds from last year where you were in the playoffs to becoming the top overall seed, that has to count for something. Yes, I know LeBron James was injured and other teams are dealing with injuries, load management, but still, with Donovan Mitchell being sidelined for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and they still held on to that number 1 overall seed with Phoenix breathing down their necks, that has to count for something. I'm taking nothing away from the other two gentlemen who are terrific coaches in their own right. But Quinn Snyder, the way he runs that offense through Donovan Mitchell or whatever guard is there, whether it's Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson, and how they're able to facilitate and open it up to Rudy Gobert and allow Rudy Gobert room down low to capture rebounds. That's amazing. And that's really why I think Quinn Snyder and the Utah Jazz are clicking at the right time.
I almost feel like when we're talking about Coach of the Year, when that originally came out, that not that Quinn Snyder was like looked down upon, but obviously Tom Thibodeau is going to be thrown out there because of the Knicks, and Monty Williams with the Suns, just because, you know, the Devin Booker and Chris Paul duo, that star power. It's almost seemed like he's been almost slept on a little bit. And just seeing the Jazz, this is a Jazz team that was top 5 in both offensive and defensive efficiency this year, which I can't remember the last team that's done something like that. And if you're a team like that and able to do that throughout the whole regular season, and especially being matched up against teams in the Wild West, like that me and Joe have been talking about, I think you can easily make the NBA Finals this year. I think it's 100% possible, and I think it's possible that the Jazz and Bucks can be in the finals this year. I'm not necessarily saying that's my finals pick, but I think it is very possible that both the teams you beat reported today could both be in the NBA Finals in a couple weeks. But my question to you, we don't know. We're going to talk a little bit about the team that they'd be matched up against, which we'll find out later tonight. But, you know, Donovan Mitchell has been out for, you know, with the sprained ankle since April 16th. He missed, you know, like 19 games. Mike Conley missed, I think, around 20, 21 games. So, you know, not everyone on the team has been kind of clicking, and so more so the backcourt, like just, you know, with chemistry-wise. And obviously we saw at the Nets, it hasn't made that much of a difference. But just going into the playoffs, it's always good to have like your chemistry going, things clicking on both offense and defense, just for a chemistry standpoint. And it might take them a game or two to get really their footing again, like Donovan Mitchell. And when they're matched up against maybe a Steph Curry, will Jordan Clarkson carry the burden with scoring? Obviously Rudy Gobert, will be good down low. But my question to you is, do you think it's the lack of end of the season play for Donovan Mitchell is going to be an issue in any way if they're a little bit rusty to start off and they're matched up against like the red hot Warriors if they win tonight, so to say?
No, it won't be an issue because they're going to have over a week off without having to play. That's crucial. And if you look at their last game, they beat the Kings pretty decisively without Donovan Mitchell. And for me, regardless of Donovan Mitchell being out over a month or not, having him in the lineup is going to help you because you played so well without him. That just goes to show adding a star like that who's averaging 24.5 points per game before he was injured, or maybe 26. I have to go back and look at my stats, but I'm sure one of you guys can fact check me on that. But Donovan Mitchell, though, how well he has been able to play before his injury, it's terrific. So adding him back in there, I don't see it being any issue, even with the Warriors or the Grizzlies, whomever they match up against, it'll be okay because Rudy Gobert is still there. Rudy Gobert has carried the load for this team pretty much the entire season along with Donovan Mitchell. But when Mitchell's been out, Mike Conley has been out, he has been the guy whenever they needed 15 points, 19 rebounds or something crazy, he's giving it to them and he keeps them in the game. So I say all of that to say that it will really help out the Utah Jazz no matter who they have by having Donovan Mitchell because he's their star player. You could honestly say the same thing about the Lakers with LeBron James. Yes, obviously it's not apples to apples comparison because LeBron still has a little bit of experience towards the end of the regular season and he played that one playing game, but it still goes without saying, regardless of how long your star player has been out, throw them in there, they'll be okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this is looking at their opponent for the series is a little tough to talk about because I want to ask, what you think the key for the Jazz is going to be to advance in this first round, but it's tough to say because we don't know who their opponent is going to be. The Warriors and Grizzlies are going to be playing tonight for that 8 seed spot to go up against the Jazz, and there's different ways you might want to approach the two of those teams. So I want to ask you, looking at that Warriors and Grizzlies game, who do you think is going to wind up being the team that plays the Jazz? Who do you think is going to come out of this game tonight?
I think it's going to be the Golden State Warriors because they are playing at home. And the reason why I bring up the fact that they're playing at home is because these two teams played on Sunday in Oracle Arena or Chase Center, not Oracle Arena, in San Francisco. They played last Sunday. Golden State won that game. That game, do not let the score fool you whatsoever. Golden State pulled away, but Grizzlies were down by more than 10 points. They came back, tied it up, even took the lead, and then Golden State was able to fight back and then pull away for good. I think Golden State, the fact that it will be at home, there are fans there, that will help them. Yes, they played a nail-biter against the LA Lakers, and I really thought they were going to beat the Lakers, but it didn't go out their way. I think Golden State, they're going to get the job done because Steph Curry is going to have another sensational performance. I do predict, though, this is going to be another close game because the Grizzlies look good against the Spurs. I think that game against the Spurs is probably a little bit closer than the Grizzlies would have hoped, especially because in the first half they were up 37-17, and then they blew that lead, but they were able to keep them at bay. But Golden State, I think, recognizes that, especially if they're watching film, that if the Grizzlies have a lead, they can cut it and get back into the game. But I don't even think the Warriors will have a chance to be down by that much.
Yeah, I think that the way Steph Curry's been playing, it's almost like it's normal at this point, but just completely out of this world. I think it's been something terrific. And the fact that how dominant the Warriors have been, down the stretch without, Klay Thompson hasn't played. It's always interesting to say when he hasn't played. But I think the Jazz, I think we can all agree, will take care of whatever team out of the playing game comes out of it. But I just have one more question for you, Michael, and it's kind of a loaded question in one. It's a bit shorter. But first, the Donovan Mitchell stat, he's averaging 26 points per game. and he averaged 4 rebounds on the season. But my question actually revolves around him. Just as a as a Jazz enthusiast, as a NBA fan, or just a watcher of the sport, do you think at this point Donovan Mitchell is a bona fide star? I know this is a loaded question, and just we saw last year in the playoffs he played exceptionally well. He was throwing blows with Jamal Murray. He was playing against the Nuggets. We've seen it in the past, but many are going to question this season when they see the Jazz as the 1 seed. They're going to be like, okay, Donovan Mitchell's there. Can we put him on the same level as some of these other loaded teams in the West, so to say? So at this point, do you think he's a bona fide star yet, or do you think he's still 1 or 2 years in the making?
Without a doubt, he's a star. He's been a star since his rookie year. And the reason why is the moment he got there, he made the Jazz better. And he's still making them better each and every year. He's improving. The way I look at Donovan Mitchell is like a stock. Regardless of what happens in the playoffs, I don't see his stock dropping whatsoever in terms of being a star. He can only improve, right? He's like a blue chip stock. To me, I think he's a bona fide star. He can't drop whatsoever. He can only gain. I think if the Jazz find a way to make the finals, he is going to be talked about as a top 10 player in the league, because all he needs is just some more attention, some more eyes on him, especially the fact that there will be more pressure on this Jazz team than ever before. This is the 3rd time in Utah's history that they are entering the playoffs as the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. That means a lot. And the last time, 97-98, as we talked about with the 2 final teams. So there's a very good chance, if history repeats itself, that since they are the number 1 seed, they may have a solid shot to get to the finals. And if that is the case, it will be through Donovan Mitchell's hard work and his talent.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said, Michael. And that sort of almost brings it full circle back to that first question I asked you, which was about, the Jazz. Maybe they don't have that superstar talent like the Lakers and Clippers. I think they do. And I think it is Donovan Mitchell. And I think people are too quick to discount him and say that, he's not on that level really. And, it's more of a, they don't really rely on him that much. But I mean, he really is a star, and he's so young. The sky is the limit for him. And like you said, I mean, if he makes a run and goes to the finals, I feel like it could be like what we saw when Kawhi made that one deep run with the Spurs, where that was sort of people really turned on to him and said, oh, wait a second, this guy's really, really a legit superstar. I think this is the year for Donovan Mitchell to do that and go out there and prove that, no, I'm not just some second-tier star who can only be a second option on some team or something. I am worthy of being included in that top tier, in that top 10 upper echelon of NBA talent.
And I just want to say something because I know we're up against the clock. Not only do they have Donovan Mitchell, who's a star in his own right, Rudy Gobert is a defensive player candidate. And I think he's going to prove that throughout the playoffs. Let's not forget, too, the Utah Jazz have 2 candidates for 6th Man of the Year, Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles. Look for those 2 guys to really step up and help out Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, Jordan Clarkson especially, he's had some just almost unreal performances this year. He's dropping 40 balls against teams and coming off the bench. He can almost score at will, I feel like, at times. And having a good player off the bench like that in a playoff run, let's say if they end up getting matched up against the Lakers later on in like a Western Conference Finals, the Lakers bench, there's obviously great names on the bench, but who's going to erupt at a moment's notice? We don't know. You can almost bet money that Jordan Clarkson's going to be a consistent scoring threat, I think, throughout the playoffs, so to say. And I think the Jazz are definitely in a good position to succeed. And definitely the sky's the limit, even if this is not the year. But I just think there's a very good chance with the way the West has been playing out that they have a shot. But I'd like to thank you, Michael, for, again, being a reporter for 2 excellent teams and giving just 2 excellent expert insights for both. We want to thank you for your time again and just for everything. So once again, this is Michael Daly.
Thank you, guys. Great job. You guys have done a terrific job. I'll be watching.
On the flip side, Michael, thank you again for everything you've done for us tonight, man.
You too.
Once again, that was the Michael Daly. And if you want to follow Michael on Twitter, I'm going to pull up his handle real quick. It is at Michael Bray Daly. And he does a lot of good work. I know he's a MMA boxing writer for the TWSN. Just a lot of great content he puts out there too, similar to Joel. Just so much to talk about with everything with that. We could do another whole show about him. But now let's move on to the number 2, number 7 matchup, which is the Suns and the Lakers. And for our last analyst of the night, we'll be bringing in the man, the myth, the legend, none other than himself, Mr. Ryan Johnston, who will be sort of our Lakers reporter, but again, he's going to talk about the Suns, who are the 2 seed, and the Lakers. So let's wait for him to get on, and here he is. So Ryan, how are we doing tonight?
I'm pretty good. Pretty good. How are you guys doing?
Doing mighty fine. It's a beautiful night. Anticipating, the best day in the NBA tomorrow, which is the kickoff of the playoffs. I got butterflies in the stomach. I'm going. And with that, let's just jump right into it and talk about this series. The Suns and the Lakers, I think, is going to be the best first round series. And I think it is one of the most exciting first round series in a long, long time. Because the Lakers, it's been kind of a roller coaster season for them, where throughout the first, half, 2/3 of the year, they were the undisputed best team in the West, and they were going to the finals no matter what. And then they got hit with injuries, and they slid down in the standings a bit. And they started to pick up a little bit of momentum at the end of the year once LeBron and AD came back, but now they're at the 7th seed. And this might be the most talented 7th seed ever in NBA history, and one of the best teams, and one of the most underseeded teams ever. I mean, that's sort of making a parallel to sort of the NCAA tournament where, you say teams are underseeded and they don't really deserve to be a 7th seed. The Lakers don't deserve to be a 7th seed, but they are based on their record, just due to things out of their control. But with all that being said, and I know I went on a bit of a ramble there, what do you think is going to be the story for the Lakers in this series? Do you think that they're still that top tier team and they're just, they just slid because of the injuries and that they're back to full strength? Or do you think that there's a bit more concern that comes with this team for the series?
I mean, you basically mentioned it. The injury bug definitely bit the Lakers in the butt this season. I think they were 21-6 before LeBron went out with his first injury, and since then they've really slid. AD, he barely even played half the season. He played 36 games, literally exactly half of the season. He definitely struggled a little bit more this year, and the Lakers did, as a whole, definitely struggled a little bit more this year. If you told me coming into this year that they were going to be a 7th seed by the time the playoffs come around, I probably would have laughed at you. But injuries always unpredictable, definitely unfortunate. But I mean, I'm pretty optimistic. I think the big storyline for the Lakers coming into this is if they can start gelling again, because even towards the end of the season when they were fully healthy again, they didn't really look like themselves. It kind of seemed like they were out of sorts. LeBron and AD, Dennis Schroeder in that first half against the Warriors just look awful. They they really shot the ball really, really poorly. I think at one point they were like 2 for 22 with a combined 8 points. So really, really shot the ball poorly. I think the biggest storyline for them is that if they can get back to that, early season form, just dominating everybody, start gelling on all cylinders again, and really just hand it to the Suns team.
Yeah, Ryan, I like what you said that it's not only the injuries that are a concern. Obviously, LeBron missed, I think, 26 out of the last 30 games. But just the fact that they haven't looked like themselves, it's almost like a bizarro version of the team, I think, throughout the end of the regular season, where, LeBron and AD were coming off injuries. They both had big games down the stretch, but not as a whole cohesive unit yet. And I feel like so many different, talents and personalities on this team this year, especially, bringing in Dennis Schroeder. You have Montrezl Harrell stealing him from the Clippers, just a whole bunch of players. So before I even thought we dive into the Suns and their capabilities as a 2 seed, my question to you is, outside of the dynamic duo of LeBron and AD, what do you think is the most important player beyond them that has to step up in this Suns series in order for them to, I guess we could call it an upset because they're the 7th seed, but to basically advance and for this player to have a big impact throughout the rest of their potential championship run?
I mean, I would definitely say it has to be Dennis Schroeder. If he can really score the ball, as he has shown his ability to in the past. I mean, with the Thunder, I think he averaged 20 a game. I mean, if he can really get back to that point, he averaged 15 for this season, which isn't terrible. It's not like he had a really bad season or anything like that, but I think he's the X factor for this Lakers team. If he can really get going in the playoffs, I don't think anyone can stop them, quite frankly. I think they'll just roll to the finals if he averages 20, 22 a game in the playoffs. I know it's a lot to ask, especially with how ball dominant LeBron and AD can be, and rightfully so. But if he can really get going, shooting a high percentage, I think there's no reason that anyone would beat this team, quite frankly.
Yeah, no, I love your point about Schroeder because I mean, looking back at last year when the Lakers won the championship, a huge part of that and part of their playoff win was Rajon Rondo. I mean, he played a massive role in that team, and now he's gone, and Schroeder's brought in that guy to sort of replace him and fill that role. And so, if he's able to do that, that's going to be really great for him because he's sort of like you said, he's going to be the X factor. He could be that key piece and the glue that makes them click and play just like they did during their run last year. So that's going to be really, really interesting to follow and see if that happens. Now I want to shift gears and talk more about the Suns real quick. They've got a really, really talented roster. Chris Paul, Devin Booker, I mean, they're their two sort of number one, number two stars who are going to carry the scoring load for them. But one player that I'm looking at their roster and I'm really intrigued by, and especially in this series, is DeAndre Ayton. Because the Lakers obviously have a really, really generational center in Anthony Davis, guy who can play down low, one of the best we've seen in the past decade, in just recent history, one of the all-time greats. DeAndre Ayton is more of a blossoming star. He was a number one overall pick just a couple of years ago. He's really starting to sort of find his stride. But do you think that he can match up well against Anthony Davis? And not to say that he'll shut Anthony Davis down, but do you think he's got the potential to really give Anthony Davis some work down there? And, I mean, just be a key to help shut him down and help the Suns win?
Honestly, not really, because I think Anthony Davis, he's so versatile. That's what makes him so good. He's really, expanded his game to that mid-range. And I think that he's just going to take DeAndre Ayton out to that, mid-range, that high post area, and either go right by him if he plays up, if DeAndre Ayton plays up on him, or just shoot it right over him if he sags off. I don't think DeAndre Ayton is quick enough to keep up with AD outside of the paint. I mean, on offense, he's definitely bigger than AD. So don't be surprised if the Suns look to force the ball into the post a little bit more with AD on him. But, AD is a great defender. He's been in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation for, I don't know, basically since he came into the league. So even with that being said, I wouldn't even be surprised if the Lakers opted for that Twin Towers approach that they did with JaVale McGee last year. And they put Andre Drummond in there just to try and, stretch the Suns' bigs as much as possible because DeAndre Ayton can't cover both of them at the same time. So I definitely look for Frank Vogel to try and really take advantage of his size on this, of the size that the Lakers have on this Suns team.
I think it would be absolutely terrifying if Andre Drummond and Anthony Davis, if they both get hot in the playoffs and they're doing, like you said, like the dueling or the double towers approach, if they're playing each and every game, the rebounding numbers those two will put up together, it's like they'll be swapping, I think, double doubles each and every game. I think if that happens. But I like the point you guys both are about DeAndre Ayton, that even if, like, in my opinion, I agree with you, Ryan. I don't think he's going to be able to outlast Anthony Davis. I don't think anyone expects that to happen. But I think this is just valuable experiences for him as a young big in the league who was number one pick, that he's kind of like getting seasoned this year in the playoffs, where he might not necessarily do that well, and many are not expecting him to do that well against Anthony Davis and, the loaded Lakers, front court. But I just think getting this experience is so crucial. And we'll look down the lineup for the Suns. I'm going to ask you a question about, the youth aspect. Chris Paul's played 109 playoff games. Jay Crowder's played 72. The rest, little to none. It's the playoff debut of Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, who could be an all-defensive team selection. DeAndre Ayton, again, is his first playoff action. But even like Devin Booker, who's been in this probably top 5 in scoring for every year in the last couple of seasons, he's finally playing in the playoffs. He could either be, a mega superstar, almost Donovan Mitchell, I feel like, type of threat in the playoffs. Or maybe maybe Chris Paul, who sometimes underperformed in the past. People like to forget about that Chris Paul, is like the mini Salvation Army for every NBA team, but he's had his pair of struggles in the past on playoff teams. So, Ryan, my question to you is, for the Suns and just, obviously you're our Lakers beat reporter, but just in the series as a whole, do you think the lack of playoff experience for the Suns is going to bite them in the end? And are they going to be too over-dependent on CB3?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. You're looking at this Lakers roster. You got a lot of seasoned vets that really know how to rise to the occasion. I mean, LeBron alone, basically all you need is LeBron, and you're going to be all right in the playoffs. But you couple that with the championship experience that basically half the roster got last year, coupled with vets like Dennis Schroeder, even Andre Drummond. He hasn't had a lot of playoff experience, but he has some at least. And the Suns are just kind of coming into this, blind. I would say they don't really know the pressures of the playoffs yet. I think Devin Booker, I do think he's going to rise to the occasion, but a lot of these guys, it's going to be really hit or miss, I think, for the Suns. Even DeAndre Ayton, someone who's been pretty consistent for the Suns all season long. I think these guys can be hit or miss because it is their first playoff series, and they're coming into it as the favorites against the defending champs, at least in terms of the standings. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the pressure impacts them. But I don't think it's going to be the best for them, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. And like you said, I'm Jonathan, with Devin Booker making his playoff debut now, it almost seems like that's not a real stat because like he's been in the conversation as one of the best players in the league for, 5 years now probably. And he's just had the misfortune of being on some really, really awful Suns teams. And so I'm excited to see him finally play on the big stage and see what he can do. But I mean, again, it comes down to that experience. And Ryan, you said it, all you need is LeBron. I mean, he can drag. Look at him in Cleveland. He dragged the team that started J.R. Smith and George Hill to the NBA Finals. I mean, when it comes down to it, it's all going to rely on him, and you just need him to carry you. And I mean, the Suns, I feel just bad for them because they fought so hard this year, and they played out of their minds, and they're the 2 seed. And, you're thinking there and sitting there and thinking, all right, we're the 2 seed, we're just going to get a 7 seed who shouldn't give us too much trouble. We should be able to handle that, move on to the second round, get some experience. And you're looking there at the defending champions who are at full strength. And so you got to feel bad for the Suns. But, I said it earlier, I think it's going to make for some really, really great viewing as fans. And it's going to be one of the more intense first round series you're going to see in a long time. So, I mean, unbelievably excited to see that. With that said, we kind of want to move a little bit away from our playoff talk to ask you the 2 questions we've been asking everybody, all of our analysts tonight, which is number 1, who's your MVP? There's the 3 finalists of Embiid, Curry, and Jokic. And number 2, what's your finals prediction? Do you have your Lakers coming out of that 7 seed and running the gauntlet and repeating as champs, or do you have something else happening? Who's going to take the finals, and who are they going to win it over?
All right, a couple of big questions right there. MVP. I'm going to have to go with Nikola Jokic. All right, I really love Steph Curry, he's probably my favorite player in the league right now. He's so fun to watch, just pulling up from anywhere. And what he's been able to do this season is definitely historic. Like I think he's might have had his best year, excluding maybe 2016, because he unanimous MVP, 73-9 season. That's legendary stuff right there. But one of the best seasons of his career this year, just being able to do what he did with this limited Warriors roster, really, really limited, it is extremely impressive. But, Jokic, his second best player has been out for, 30 games now, in Jamal Murray with that ACL tear. And he still willed the Nuggets to the 3rd seed. I think that alone is very impressive. The Warriors a bit farther back in that 8th seed. I think that's the main reason for me. It's just how much more wins the Nuggets got, or not wins, but how much higher they are in the standings than the Warriors. I think that's really propelled Nikola Jokic above Curry for me, at least in the MVP talk. Joel Embiid had a great season for sure, but I think those other 2 guys were just a bit more necessary. Literally every single time the ball went through them. The Sixers have a very solid roster. Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris had a pretty underrated year. I think the Sixers have a few more weapons than those other teams, and I really think Nikola Jokic kind of is the reason the Nuggets where they are. I know that sounds obvious, but it's the truth. As for finals, I may be a bit biased. I may go with my Lakers. I think they got really lucky with the 7th seed because I think their side of the bracket is a lot easier than the other side of the bracket. wouldn't have to if they lost that game, and I would not be as confident facing the Jazz in the first round as I am facing the Suns. I think the Lakers match up pretty well with the Suns. You know, they've got a lot of length. I mean, number 1 defensive rating in the league, even with LeBron and AD out for so long. I think they can really bother Devin Booker and Chris Paul. You can't shut them down completely, obviously. But, you know, looking forward, the Nuggets or the Blazers, Jamal Murray's out. It's basically just Nikola Jokic against this Lakers team. That's a bit of an exaggeration, obviously, but I'm really confident that the Lakers could beat the Nuggets. And on the flip side, the Blazers, you know, the Blazers had a really good end of the season. I'm not going to lie. They really did. But just with the history alone between the Lakers and the Blazers, I'd have to favor the Lakers in that matchup. Conference finals, I don't really know who's going to come out of the other side of the bracket, but I don't know. I'm rambling on at this point. I just think the Lakers, we got it this year. I think we're going back to back, baby. Laker Nation.
Yeah, Ryan, I just want to reassure you. So you're our 4th and final analyst. You're 4 for 4 with the Nikola Jokic pick, which I think we can all agree he should be the MVP, despite what Steph Curry has done. You know, just if we're really taking into consideration where your team ends at the end of a regular season, I just think that being able to keep the Nuggets at a 3 seed without Jamal Murray, even after and still playing at that level, I 100% think he should be MVP still. And I think it would be a snub if he wasn't. So I 100% agree with that. And I think we can easily make an argument that the Lakers can repeat. And I think they're very, like we've talked about, very fortunate they're not playing the Jazz in the first round. Because I feel like if they were matched up against the Jazz, then you maybe could say they could really get upset. Well, it's even hard to say upset now because the Lakers are lower. But I think if they were matched up against the Jazz, when you got a Rudy Gobert down there, you know, around the rim where Anthony Davis could get restricted by him. And we still don't know if LeBron and Davis, are they at full health? We really don't know. And they haven't meshed together. It could take a couple of games. But again, this almost baby Suns team, I think they're a year or 2 away. Next year, they could easily, I think, make it even farther one than they can this year. But I 100% agree that the Lakers definitely have a very legitimate shot of both coming out of the West and defeating even a Brooklyn Nets team that comes out of the East where, you know, the Lakers are a stellar defensive team. Sorry, you go first, Ryan.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I don't think I
Oh, no worries. Yeah, no, but you have to, I mean, the Lakers are an excellent defensive team. And I feel like if they're matched up against the Nets, I mean, especially around the rim, if you put Anthony Davis and Andre Drummond out there and the Nets just have, I mean, like, it'll be DeAndre Jordan and what Joe was talking about, Nicholas Claxton's been excellent, but, you know, Drummond and Davis are, you know, stars. Obviously, Anthony Davis is one of the best power forwards in the league, but Andre Drummond's been playing exceptionally well this year too. How that would play out, I think that would definitely, they'd give the Nets a run for their money. I don't think they could beat the Nets, but I definitely think the Lakers definitely are in a good shot. But once again, this was Ryan Johnston, who was our fabulous Lakers beat reporter tonight. He did an excellent job. So Ryan, just thank you again for your time and just giving us another, you know, great pieces of information that are definitely help our viewers better understand the NBA playoffs. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. It was a lot of fun. I'll be tuned in for the rest of the night. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Ryan. Hey, enjoy the rest of your night, man. And fingers crossed that my Nets and your Lakers will meet each other in the finals at some point. So see you around, man.
Okay, so once again, that was Ryan Johnston, whose Twitter handle is Johnston R_. So if you want to follow him, he puts out a lot of good stuff. You know, you, Joe, and him are graphics masters. You know, I do a little bit myself, but you guys are on a whole nother level with some of the graphics we do for WSOU. There's so much to talk about from everything. So now, at this point of the show, we've heard from all of our analysts, and we're left with 2 series. We got Nuggets Blazers and Clippers Mavericks, which will take us to around 8:20, and then we'll wrap up at right around 8:30. So we got the number 3 Denver Nuggets and the number 6 Portland Trail Blazers. So what I kind of thought about, Joe, and I kind of thought of just now, is maybe we'll take a team in each series and we'll give our argument for why they should win. So I'll let you pick first. What team do you want to argue for this one?
I'll take the Nuggets here. I feel like they're my pick to win, and I've got a good feeling about them, which I'll get into a little later, but I'll take the Nuggets here.
All right. So you know what? I'm going to start with the Blazers. That's fine. Obviously, I probably think the Nuggets are going to win, but here's my case for why I think the Trailblazers could win. So we got the Portland Trailblazers, who every year I feel like are they're a playoff team. you think of Damian Lillard, he should get out of Portland. Him and McCollum are arguably the best, backcourt duo in the league. But down obviously Yusuf Nurkic, he's a great offensive player. Really not that good defensively in some cases. But the Trailblazers, I feel like, are a scary team in the playoffs, and we've seen they've been able to go a couple of rounds each year. They have offensive firepower. Damian Lillard is the absolute definition of a clutch NBA player. I looked up a stat today. For this last season, out of the last 37 games, he's helped win 24 of those. He's not only averaged 28 points per game, but he has 162 points in the clutch, which by NBA standards is the last 5 minutes of a 5-point game. So if it's a close game between the Nuggets and the Blazers, Damian Lillard's going to shoot. And as we've seen with, the Thunder, the game-winning shot again, over Paul George and all that stuff in the past, the clutchness is there. Obviously, it's going to be hard when we're going to talk about the Nuggets, and Nikola Jokic is going to be the MVP, which we agreed upon. And, Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, I think, are going to have to average between 20 and 30 points per game to have a chance in this one. But I like the addition of Norman Powell, averaging 17 points per game. I like Nurkic. As a Knicks fan, I love seeing Carmelo get his career not really revamped, but playing, I think, really well off the bench and being – when he comes into the game, there's some times where you see the flashes of the prime Melo aspect, where he's, in the post and he's making people pay from the mid-range, and I just love to see it. So I think this will not be an easy series for the Nuggets to win in any way. I think it'll go to 6 or 7, but I think the Trailblazers do have a shot, regardless if I think the Nuggets still are going to win. But if Damian Lillard gets hot and if there's a lot of close games, I would not put anything past the Blazers.
Yeah, no, the Blazers are one of those opponents that you look at as, a sort of top seed and say, oh man, I really don't want to play these guys first round. Because like you said, Damian Lillard, one of the best players in the entire league, a guy who can go off 450. He could legitimately, he's on like a short list of like maybe 3 players where he could average 50 points per game in this series, and I wouldn't bat an eye. I'd be like, oh yeah, that's pedestrian for him. Yeah, that's completely normal. It's Damian Lillard. He's just ridiculous, and he could take over any game. He's going to give them some work, I think. But the Nuggets, it comes down to, we've talked about it all night, they have the MVP. Nikola Jokic is playing like a man possessed this year. I want to read you through something, and this is, I'm spoiling my MVP pick, that we were all going to give tonight.
Yeah, we both kind of
It's
did.
Jokic. It's Jokic. And just listen to these stats. Nikola Jokic leads the Nuggets in points per game, and rebounds per game, and field goal percentage, and assists per game, and he's tied for the lead in steals per game on the Nuggets. And that's just a fraction of the things that he leads them in. He's doing absolutely everything for this team. He's playing unreal. I mean, in a series, I'm betting on the team with the best player. I mean, I think Joel said it a little earlier how he was saying Trae Young's the best player in that series. And Joel didn't pick the Hawks to win, of course. But I mean, I think that's sort of my rule of thumb is the team with the best player in an NBA playoff series, they come out of it on top the most. And as great as Damian Lillard is, Nikola Jokic is better this year. He's just playing out of his mind. And yes, they are not as good as they were when they had Jamal Murray, right? That's a devastatingly huge blow. And I was so upset when that happened because I love Jamal Murray. He's one of my favorite players in the league. And last year in the bubble, he went off in the playoffs and helped the Nuggets. And it just sucked. It was gut-wrenching to see him go down. But there's a guy who's someone that, keep on your radar and get ready to, hear about this dude throughout this playoffs, throughout the first round especially. Michael Porter Jr. He is a young guy, right? He, in high school, coming out of high school, he's one of the top recruits in the country. And he went to University of Missouri. And heading into his freshman year, before his freshman season, he was being billed as a consensus number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft because that's the type of talent this guy had, and that's how highly billed he was as a recruit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately for him, he's had a lot of injury issues that he's had to, grind through, and it kind of derailed his college season. It made him slip a little. He got drafted in the late lottery by the Nuggets. He's missed some time in the NBA a little bit, but he's healthy now, and he's finding his stride, and he's showing people that, this is why I was being billed as a number 1 overall pick, because he's got ridiculous amounts of talent. He's having a fantastic season. And the big thing is that he has stepped up in a huge way to fill Jamal Murray's role on this team. I'll read you these stats. Before Jamal Murray's injury this year, it was 44 games. Michael Porter Jr. was averaging 30.5 minutes per game, 17.3 points per game, right, on a true shooting percentage of 64.5%. Those are really great numbers. I mean, just that's for a guy who is a really young guy, only his second year in the league. I mean, that's outstanding. But then after Murray got injured, he stepped up, and in those 17 games post Murray's injury, 33.4 minutes per game. He's averaging close to 24 points per game at 23.5, and he's shooting at a true shooting percentage of 70.2. So, I mean, he's found another gear. You know, they told him, they said, okay, you know, Jamal Murray's out. He was our number 2 guy. He was a huge key part of this team. We need to fill his role. And they assigned that role to Michael Porter Jr. And he didn't, you know, it wasn't, oh, he's a young guy. He's got to adjust to it. He cracked under pressure. No, he took it on and said, I'm going. I'm filling that role, and I'm going to be our number 2 scorer. And so I think he's got the potential, with how we've seen him play post Murray's injury. And I mean, throughout the playoffs, I think he's going to be one of the guys who I'm looking for and sort of feeling early that he's going to really break out and put people on notice. We already said it about Donovan Mitchell, but I think he's going to be a guy who, you know, people are going to start to include him in that upper tier. I think I think Michael Porter Jr. is really going to become a household name around the NBA in this playoffs. I think he's going to step up in a huge way to fill Murray's role. And he's a guy who, the fact that he's been playing so well, I think that's going to be able to, it's not going to get them to where they were pre-Murray's injury. I mean, if they had Jamal Murray still, the Nuggets would be absolutely ridiculously good. And I think they would be good enough to have gotten the 1 seed down the stretch of the season. But I mean, Michael Porter Jr., I think he can absolutely fill that role for Jamal Murray. And let's not forget, they traded for Aaron Gordon. And Aaron Gordon is no slouch. And in fact, he's been playing exceptional basketball since he got to the Nuggets. He's played his role spectacularly. And so they've got 3 guys there who can carry the load, who can score, who can play defense. You know, Nikola Jokic is kind of do everything, and he's going to be the guy that you lean on because he's the league MVP. I mean, at least we all think. But you've got a deep enough squad. You've got Campuzzo, rookie point guard, who's been playing phenomenally. I mean, they've got all the pieces there to A, take on this Blazers team round 1, and B, make a deep run in the playoffs. And I mean, I think with all of that combined, this is a Nuggets team that is going to go far. And, you know, I just don't see a way they lose to this Blazers team. I mean, I think there's too much talent, and Mike Malone is such a great coach. And everything the Nuggets have done so far this year, there's just too much going right for it to go wrong, at least in the first round. You know, once you get into the second round, you know, if they start to run into the Lakers or something, you know, or they run into the Suns, or then you might want to start having a little more concerns of, okay, you know, will that be enough to really take down these teams? But right now, against the Blazers, I think that it's going to be kind of an easy job for the Nuggets. And I mean, that just really, that's no detriment to the Blazers. I think they're a fantastic team. They have so much talent, but it's just how much I believe in this Nuggets team. And I think they're really going to come out playing on a different level. They're going to be motivated. I mean, with the lack of Jamal Murray, they're going to have a fire behind them and say, you know what, we can still win without him. Let's win for him, you know, play for your guys, you know. It's just, I love this Denver Nuggets team. I think they're really good. I'm really so upset that Jamal Murray is out, because they would be my, bar none, they were going to go and romp through the West if they still had Jamal Murray the way they're playing right now. Obviously they don't, so that adds a little more of a question mark to them. But still, top 3 team in the West, one of my favorite teams to watch. And it's going to be, I think, just an absolute blowout of a series. I really think the Nuggets are going to come out and just dominate.
I think I have to agree with you about the Jamal Murray point. If the Nuggets had Jamal Murray, I think they could have went all the way this year, especially what happened last year. And like I kind of talked about with teams like the Suns, and even obviously the Jazz got a little bit taste of that, but the Nuggets have been through the gauntlet, as we saw in the bubble last year, and they've been toe-to-toe with, you know, some of the best teams. They've come back from 3-1 leads, and they've been so dominant in so many facets. Obviously, the start of this year, they started off a little bit slow, and Nikola Jokic was still dominant through all of that. And I think it's just something so incredible that a guy who's just really not as athletic as compared to some of his NBA counterparts is arguably the best player in the league right now and should be the MVP. I think it's something that it's so unusual because when I think of Nikola Jokic, I think of almost like a Dirk Nowitzki like type of, foreign, obviously player from overseas that came over and just took the NBA by storm, and he's done that, and bar none for the Nuggets. So that'll definitely be a good series. Just again, we wish Jamal Murray was healthy because I think they could have made a big run. But even though I chose the Blazers like as my team, I think the Nuggets will overtake them. But I think it'll be a 6-7 game series. I disagree that it will be a blowout. I think it will be closer just from the Damian Lillard aspect. But that brings us to our last series of the night to break down the Clippers and the Mavericks. So Joe, who do you want to take for this one?
Well, I got first pick last time, so I'll let you take your first pick in these two teams too.
See, like I obviously with the Blazers and Nuggets, I feel like obviously the Nuggets are the favorite. But with this series, I guess I'll pick the Clippers, but I am not 100% sold on them, which I'll get into right now. So you have the LA Clippers, who have just been one of the most intriguing teams, I think, in the entire NBA for the past couple of years, especially since Kawhi and Paul George got there. They've underperformed. They've been disappointing at times. They've not played up to their full potential in any way, shape, or form. But against a Mavericks team who they did play in Disney last year in the bubble, I still remember that Luka Doncic buzzer beater to win, I think, games 2 or 3. It was unbelievable. And I even recorded a bit for it for the station. I just think besides the Mavericks taking the season series, I mean, obviously Luka Doncic is going to play out of this world like he does in every game. I think he'll be an MVP in the next 5 years. That's my prediction for him. But I mean, the thing that's different about the Clippers this year, and especially I guess in previous years, is I feel like the window is shrinking just a little bit for them, especially with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, because these other teams in the West, especially look at the Jazz and the Suns, who are younger, who are reloading, who are going to be good over the next potentially 3, 4, 5 years. People don't talk about the Clippers as much. They just seem as this team that thought, they had their chances to win in the past, and they did not take them. They lost the Nuggets, in the past. But Kawhi this year is averaging, 24.8 points per game. He's having a career high in assists at 5.2, which I think is really important for a Clippers team that, you think of just Kawhi and Paul George as dominating most of the time possession, but him being able to facilitate a little bit more would, I think, potentially help them. Paul George kind of tapered off at the end of the season, but he started off super high, the 23.3 points a game. But will Pandemic P, which the nickname he got last year, will that happen again? I just find it hard to see the Clippers lose this series just because I obviously love Luka Doncic and I love even Tim Hardaway, the ex-Knick, but Kristaps Porzingis is just every day is a new injury. If he was fully healthy and him and Luka really had some time to really develop even more of a chemistry together, I think they could have beaten the Clippers. But I think the Clippers and the Mavericks will go to a 6 or 7 game series. It won't be easy, but I think the Clippers will come out on top. Obviously, Tyronn Lue is a good postseason coach. We saw with the Cavs, even though he had LeBron, the best player in the world. I just think that there's just too much with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. I think Paul George is not going to be Pandemic P this year. I think he's going to play better. Do I think they're going to win in the next round? Probably not. But I just think that they're going to take care of the Dallas Mavericks in round number 1. Obviously, last year in Disney, they won, and I think it was in 6. I think I could see that happening again. These teams know each other, and that's one thing that you can't ever discount. And you're going to give a really good argument for the Mavericks, that 2 teams that have played each other a lot, especially when Michael Dale was talking earlier about the Bucks and the Heat, that the Bucks have such a chip on their shoulder. The Mavericks are going to have a chip on their shoulder. So it's going to, is Luka Doncic going to put up 50 points a game? Who knows? If the Clippers underperform like they have in the past, I think it's possible. So let me hear what you have to say, Joe, about the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting series. Again, I agree with you. I don't know if the Mavericks are going to be able to pull this one out. Like you said, especially with Porzingis, the injuries, he's been banged up a little bit down the month of May. They've had some other injury issues. Maxi Kleber has been dealing with an Achilles problem on and off, kind of, that they actually just announced during our show. I got a notification that JJ Redick is, and I'm going to read, he's unlikely to play at all round 1 due to an injury. So,
Yeah,
they're kind of banged up. they're not at full strength. They don't have the deepest squad. I mean, it's going to come down to Luka, I feel like, which that's kind of been the story. The story of the season for the Mavericks is that it's just how far can Luka take you. And don't get me wrong, Luka is phenomenal. I mean, you said it too. I love Luka Doncic. He's one of my favorite players in the league. He's averaging 27.7 points per game, 8 rebounds, 8.6 assists. Those are all NBA first team MVP level numbers. He's such a young guy too. He's only 22 years old. Like doing that, having those stats at that age is not human. He's going to be around for a long. He's going to be around for a long, long time. I just don't think he's there yet. I think this kind of goes a little bit into what we were talking about with the Suns, which is experience. Right, and obviously Luka does have postseason experience. Like you said, he hit that massive shot in the bubble last year. But I feel like it's a bit too much with how everything is falling out for the Mavericks right now with the injuries. I feel like it might just be a little too much on the shoulders of Luka Doncic, because I mean it's gonna really have to come down to him probably. And they're gonna say, Luka, just carry the scoring for us and get all the rebounds and get all the assists and just take us through this series against a team that has 2 Hall of Fame talents and Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and a deep squad outside of that. They've got Rondo now, the Clippers, who played a huge role, like you said, and for the Lakers. It's just going to be tough for the Mavericks to take this one, I think. I mean, they won the season series, the Mavericks, interestingly enough. They 2-1. The only time the Clippers beat them, they won 109-99 on March 15th. But, it's just, it's really hard for me to pick the Mavericks here and see kind of a scenario where they can come out on top. I mean, you'd have to, like you said, the whole pandemic piece thing where,
if it happens again, who knows?
Yeah, exactly. If it happens again, like that, I feel like that's really the only scenario where I can see the Clippers faltering in this round if, Paul George has an epic playoff collapse again or, some sort of chemistry issue happens between the two teams. I really see it as, the Clippers, they should win this series pretty handily. And that's no discredit for the Mavericks, but they're just in a tough spot right now. They've got a lot of stuff to work through. It's just going to be tough. I mean, one guy who I do want to highlight for the Mavericks and talk about because he's a phenomenal player, and another guy who, if the Mavericks pull this out and shock me at least and take this serious, I think he's going to have to play a huge role. That's Jalen Brunson, who a Big East product out of Villanova. But he's had a remarkably great year and it's kind of flown under the radar. He averaged 13 points per game, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. I mean, I feel like going to have to be one of the second scoring options at times. Porzingis should be able to be healthy enough to play and carry sort of that second option scoring load. But, Jalen Brunson's going to have to play a key role. He's going to have to be the guy who, maybe he runs the second unit when Luka's sitting, if he can really tap into another gear and blossom a little bit and, that would definitely help the Mavericks pull off this upset. But I mean, just to get echoing the same point, the Clippers are too talented, I think, and the Mavericks are just dealing with a little bit too much right now. The Mavericks are not there yet, and I don't think that's not even really a bad thing. Like they've got a really still bright future. Luka's so young. They're still sort of in that process of getting together a good, solid team around Luka and getting him to pieces. And right now, it's almost more a little bit of just getting Luka that experience and get him used to playing in the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not the Mavericks year yet, but it's coming. And this is, I want to say it's going to be a fun series, but I really honestly, in my gut, think it's going to be another the Clippers are going to blow through the Mavericks here. I really think that this is, like if the Clippers don't win the series, something wild's gonna happen. So I mean, that's all I've got to say about this one, really.
Yeah, I think if the Clippers don't win, you might have to even blow the team up. I think if you're getting bounced, right?
The key thing to watch too, with regards to that, is that Kawhi has that opt out coming up. Maybe if the Clippers falter here, does Kawhi dip and say, all right,
on the Knicks,
in LA, and maybe he comes to the Knicks.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure if he would come. He's more of a West Coast kind of guy. I feel like, especially making a decision to go to LA, but definitely I think it'll be an interesting series. But the Clippers, I think they better come out on top if they want to really stay a relevant team next year. But okay, so Joe, we have 10 minutes left, and what I kind of imagine us doing is a little changing it up a little bit. We'll give our finals pick in the last 5 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to name all of the end of the season awards that just got announced, all the finalists. We'll go one by one, and we'll just each back and forth give our picks for each. So let's start with MVP. Do we both say Nikola Jokic?
Unanimous right there
All right.
amongst the WSU sports staff. Nikola Jokic is the MVP.
All right. So Nikola Jokic, we're saying is the MVP, beating it over Steph Curry and Joel Embiid. We've made so many arguments. Everyone's given a good. Honestly, all of our analysts have given good just pieces of information. At least one new brand piece of information about him. Definitely, that's helped. But
I do want to say in regard to the whole MVP race real quick is that Jokic is my pick, but Curry is as close as you can be to that first place spot for me, because I really think if you look at most valuable player from like the name and like what it really like the essence of it is supposed to be, which is the most valuable player to their team, that's actually Steph Curry. I mean, the Warriors, look at where they were last year when he missed like the bulk of the season. They were the number 2 overall pick in the NBA draft before this year. They were a legitimately horrible team. And just by adding Steph Curry to that, he's taken them to be potentially a playoff team, provided they win tonight. It's just hard to imagine where the Warriors would be without Steph. And I mean, if you look at it from the angle, Steph does everything in his power he's dragging that team to the playoffs. He's dragging that team through the year. He won the scoring title. He's just absolutely phenomenal. And I think you could very, very easily make the case that he even more than Jokic, Curry provides more value to the Warriors than Jokic does to the Nuggets, I feel like. But with the way, especially in recent years, the voting and everything for MVP does not work out that way. They don't give it to the true, this guy has provided the most valuable to his team. I personally like to call the MVP award the best player on the top 3C award, because that's kind of what it always comes down to.
that's good.
But I think even so, I mean, I do think Jokic is going to win it, and I think he's going to run away with the MVP. And I still would pick him over Curry though, just because like our guys have said, the fact that Jamal Murray went down, and at that point, people were kind of like, oh, shoot, like the Nuggets are not looking good now. And then Jokic just said, no, let's just not miss a beat. He's just absolutely carried that team. And, he's still my MVP pick. And as much as I love Steph Curry, and I think Steph Curry deserves it, I think Jokic just deserves it a little bit more. He does fit more the traditional lately mold of what writers have been picking for MVP. So he's my pick for MVP.
Yeah, I think I like what you said, that joke kind of thing where it was like the top 3, right? The best player on a top 3 seed. I think that 100%, because it's just so hard to argue Steph Curry, who's trying to make it as an 8 seed. Nikola Jokic is in a top 3 seed. Jamal Murray, doesn't get hurt. He could have been a 2 seed this year maybe. So it's just hard to argue against that. But so now for the next 3 minutes, let's just do rapid fire for the remaining awards. So we got Rookie of the Year, LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, and Tyrese Halliburton. Joe, go.
Anthony Edwards. It's got to be him. I think LaMelo's just missed a little bit too much time. Anthony Edwards, from start to finish in the year, has been outstanding. He's got the ceiling is the roof for that man. I love Anthony Edwards. I think he should win it. I don't think he's going to win it. I think LaMelo Ball is going to get it from the Raiders because he's got a bigger name appeal, and Anthony Edwards plays in Minnesota, and nobody likes Minnesota and the Timberwolves. But Anthony Edwards should be the Rookie of the Year.
I agree almost to the exact detail that Anthony Edwards, I think, has been the better player. But again, LaMelo's gotten the spotlight. But the one thing I will say about LaMelo, though, is if we're doing the argument of awards being given to higher seeds, that the Hornets were in the play-in tournament, and he did bring him there, and he did make the Hornets relevant. I 100% could see why they go LaMelo Ball. But thinking about a long-term career, who's going to have the better long-term career, I think Anthony Edwards could easily have a better one in Minnesota or even another team. All right, so we picked that one. Let's do Sixth Man of the Year. We got Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles of the Jazz and Derrick Rose. So I'll go first on this one, actually, and I'm not going to be a homeboy and pick Derrick Rose, even though I think he can easily make it. I still think Jordan Clarkson is going to win this award. As much as I like Joe Ingles, I think Jordan Clarkson provides so much like starting lineup level scoring to a Jazz team that I mentioned before is going to need it in the playoffs, especially if Donovan Mitchell and Mike Conley need some more time to break into the playoff action. But that's just my pick. Joe, you go.
Yeah, this is honestly one of the tougher awards for me because I really think we go in either three ways, especially the fact that you have Joe Ingles and Jordan Clarkson on the same team, and it's kind of pitting them against each other. Who brings more value to the squad than the other, and it's kind of hard to say. That being said, I think I'm going to go with Joe Ingles. I just think that all around he provides a little more value to the Jazz than Jordan Clarkson does. No disrespect to Jordan Clarkson, like you said, he's a phenomenal scorer off the bench. 18.4 points per game off the bench. But I feel like Jordan Clarkson is a little bit more of a one-dimensional player in terms of coming off the bench, where his goal is to just go in there and score the ball. Joe Ingles kind of does it all. He shoots it. He scores it. He plays solid defense. He can play make. I mean, looking at some of the stats, like win shares, for example, which is, people don't put a lot of stock into that. Joe Ingles leads in that 7 versus 4.2 for Jordan Clarkson. I think just the all-around impact that Joe Ingles makes on the Jazz when he comes into the game is a bit more than Jordan Clarkson. And so for that reason, I would go with Joe Ingles as my sixth man of the year.
I think you definitely give a great argument for Ingles. And it's so hard, I think, to really pinpoint when two players are from the same team, that impact aspect. The only reason I elected Clarkson is I look back at previous award winners and I see, Lou Williams has won it for so many years. And I just see many of the same qualities of being that scoring dynamo machine, whatever adjective you want to use, coming off the bench. I think he provides just an extra boost to a Jazz team that I think he's a real reason why they're number 1 seed in the West. Okay, so now we got 3 more awards real quick. Let's do Defensive Player of the Year. Again, Rudy Gobert, Ben Simmons, and Draymond Green actually out of the Warriors. So, Joe, you go first. What do you got?
I'm sticking with the Jazz here and going with Rudy Gobert. I think, as good as the other two are, Draymond is one of the best defensive players of all time. He just didn't really have a year sort of to his career standard this year. It was kind of a weird year for the Warriors overall, as we've already kind of talked about a little bit. And Ben Simmons is no doubt great, but I mean, this echoes all the way back to what Ryan Henry said when we first brought him on at the beginning of the show. He's been kind of streaky and inconsistent, even on the defensive end of games, where, some of his advanced stats when you dive into him on the defensive side, they look good, but I mean, Kyrie dropped like a 40 ball on Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons was assigned to Kyrie for most of that game, and Kyrie sort of just dominated on him. And not to say, Ben Simmons actually, I think it was 42 points he dropped on Rudy Gobert himself. That was a big thing when with Ben Simmons said, this is why I deserve Defensive Player of the Year because Rudy Gobert can guard me. But I just think overall, I think Rudy Gobert is just such a transcendent defensive player. I mean, legitimately, I think he's going to be a Hall of Famer when his career is said and done. He's one of the players of this generation. There's really no one that can touch him, I feel like. And, for the Jazz, who are a number 1 seed, and part of the reason that they're a number 1 seed is because they have such an elite defense. And the reason they have such an elite defense is because it's anchored by Rudy Gobert. And, as great as Ben Simmons has played, he's been an excellent perimeter defender. He's got all, the fancy advanced stats that you want to dive into. I think just overall impact on the team defense itself, Rudy Gobert just does the most, and he's my pick for Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these awards, we're going to kind of go the way of if you are a high seed in the playoffs, I think you're going to have a better shot to win. And I will pick Rudy Gobert too. A lot of the reasons why you said it, and just the impact he's brought just for so many years, honestly, in Utah, being that defensive threat and just being like that brick wall. And even if they potentially played like the Lakers, could he take out Anthony Davis? It's possible. If he's Defensive Player of the Year, I think he could potentially neutralize him. So definitely worth talking about. But I do like Ben Simmons as maybe a dark horse just because he can guard, again, from point guard to center around the floor. And if his offense really dwindles, he could really still bring defense to the table. All right, so 2 more real quick. We got just Coach of the Year and Most Improved. So for Coach of the Year, again, Monty Williams out of the Suns, Tom Thibodeau with the Knicks, and Quinn Snyder from the Jazz. I will pick my coach who I think will win and the coach I want to win. Obviously, I'll start where I want, Tom Thibodeau. And I think who will win? I think Monty Williams at the Suns will win this one. And here's my reasoning. I think with the Phoenix Suns, just because with the Jazz, I feel like the Jazz were more established this year already, especially after the success they had last year in the postseason. or not even so much the success, but just like having the experience in general. And how Monty Williams has taken the Suns from just an irrelevant team that had young players, getting Chris Paul and meshing it together, become a 2 seed. Like I think Ryan mentioned it. Could you imagine the Suns being a 2 seed at the beginning of the season? Like, no, I just don't think it would be that possible. And because they're a top 3 seed, I think they're going to have to give it to Monty Williams. Even though what Tom Thibodeau has done in New York is like, it's just mind blowing of the way he's changed the culture and making the Knicks become a defensive minded, just grinding, physical team that will, when they verse Trae Young, I can imagine like a Frank Ntilikina coming off the bench, a bunch of players being able to neutralize him throughout the whole series. I think it's easily possible. And I do think Thibodeau should win, but I think Monty Williams will win. So Joe, you go.
Yeah, this is another one where this is really, really tough for me to pick because any of the three are more than deserving. I will say, and I know Michael Daly talked him up earlier a lot about Quinn Snyder. And again, no disrespect to Quinn Snyder. I feel like it's kind of like you said, we've already seen the Jazz sort of had that sustained success. And I feel like, with the voting, it banks a lot on, like some of those unexpected teams that come out of nowhere. I think, this was for Quinn Snyder this year, no doubt. I mean, a phenomenal coaching job. And, like Michael said, being able to keep that team together when, Donovan Mitchell went down for a period of time, he did a phenomenal job. I just think, it was sort of just this year was just him finally putting all those final pieces together that he's been building up for years and years and years. So I think it's down to Monty Williams or Tom Thibodeau for me. And it's really, really hard for me to pick between the two because I can see both of them conceivably winning. However, if I'm looking at it from the perspective, if I was a sports writer who had a ballot to vote on the award and who I would pick, and I would go with Tom Thibodeau because I think it just, the Suns and Knicks both had very similar stories this year. They both kind of just blew their expectations out of the water, went from being a non-playoff team to a top seed in each of their respective conferences. But there's two things that factor into the Suns, which I think kind of hurts Monty Williams' case for Coach of the Year with me. Number one, they almost did make the playoffs last year. They were in the bubble. They went undefeated, and there was, I forget exactly the whole circus of how things went, but they needed a couple of teams to win games for them so that they could make like the play-in or whatever the heck. And it didn't shake out for them. They didn't make the playoffs, but they were like as close as you possibly could be last year to making the playoffs. And obviously, going from even just, an 8 seed to a 2 seed is a massive, improvement, and that should be rewarded. The Knicks went from being like legitimately terrible to being a 4 seed. And I kind of weigh that as a bit of a bigger jump. And the other thing is that the Suns added Chris Paul. And Chris Paul's a Hall of Fame talent, one of the best point guards in the league. And so just adding him to that team is going to make you a little better. And he's going to add wins to that team. So I feel like you could sort of pin some of that Sun success a little more on Chris Paul than the coaching of Monty Williams. Again, not discrediting Monty Williams at all. He's a phenomenal coach, and he would be my second place choice for Coach of the Year. I just think the fact that Tom Thibodeau came into a team that was, I'm going to say they were kind of a dumpster fire and had been for years past. They didn't have any big crazy superstar additions like Chris Paul or anything. He just took that team and made them amazing and took them from being a lottery talent team with, Julius Randle was a really bad signing in free agency. Is RJ Barrett going to be a bust? I don't know. All those question marks are wiped out the window now because he took that team and put them at the 4 seed. You've got to absolutely reward that. And I really don't think there's any other coach in the league who has done anything remotely close to what Thibodeau has done for the Knicks this year. And so for that reason, he's my runaway coach of the year. Because, like you said, how if you had told someone before the year that the Suns were going to be a 2 seed, again, you would be like, oh my gosh, really? Whoa, that's a little crazy. But if you had gone back to like right before the season started and told me, hey, the Knicks are going to be the 4 seed in the East this year, Julius Randle is going to be an all-NBA type player and a potential MVP candidate, I would have looked at you and said, was there something in the milk you drank this morning? But really, that task seemed insurmountable, and Thibodeau crushed it. Knicks fan, like you, Jonathan, you guys have got to be absolutely overjoyed with everything he's done for them. He's a phenomenal coach, and the coaching feat that he did this year is an all-time great one, and you cannot not reward that and give him coach of the year in my eyes.
Yeah, I really appreciate the Thibodeau recognition. Everything you said is so valid and it's so true, and I just have such a bad gut feeling that one of the other two are going to steal it. Not steal it from, because all three of them easily could win it, I think. But just the way that awards usually play out, I just think just the fact that the Suns were just another interesting story. I just have a bad gut feeling. Well, not a bad gut feeling, but just a very big feeling that Monty Williams is going to win, especially because he won that other coaches award that was kind of like a prelude to it. Just seeing that the writers are kind of thinking, all right, he's kind of more of on our radar. But I think all three easily could make a candidate, a big candidacy for why they should win. But before we do our finals pick, which we'll wrap up in the next couple minutes, let's do most improved players, our last award. Julius Randle, Michael Porter Jr., Jeremy Grant. Now this one, the Knicks are nominated for 3 awards. Thibodeau, Rose, and Randle. They got to win at least one. I mean, it depends how they really grade improved, because obviously Julius Randle took this huge step up, but it's just a matter that, like, obviously he was a good player and he wasn't like complete, like, irrelevant before this year, but he just was not at the level he is now. So that's why if there's anything holding him back. But I just think the way he's been playing this year, as great as Michael Porter Jr. has been playing with the Nuggets, I think Julius Randle still has to win this award. Just because, honestly, when you think of improved player, Joe, who's the first person you think of this year? Don't you think of Julius Randle? It's just so hard. Exactly. You're thinking of national sports writers, NBA writers, who are going to think, all right, first, before we even go any further, what's the first thing that pops to mind? You have to think about the guy who's changed New York basketball probably for years now, and Julius Randle. He's been, we've been going on about him, and I really hope he has a great playoff series, but I just think he should win this award. He deserves this award. I do believe, Jeremy Grant's been good in Detroit, but that's, Detroit's been irrelevant, so I don't think he's going to win there. Michael Porter Jr. has been fantastic for the Nuggets, and he's going to be their number 2, like you mentioned before, too. Nikola Jokic, now that Jamal Murray's out, but I think Julius Randle takes this award home. So what do you think?
Yeah, no. I think I want to kind of run through it one by one for each of these candidates really quickly. Michael Porter Jr., first of all, I love him. I already said my piece about him and how much he has been phenomenal this year. He's not going to win it simply based on the fact that it's his second year in the NBA, and players never win most improved in their sophomore year, even if they're nominated. So I really don't think he's going to win it. So for me, it comes down to Jeremy Grant versus Julius Randle, and I'm going with Julius Randle because you have to. Because if you look at the stats, Jeremy Grant did make more of an improvement on the stat sheet, right? He went from averaging 12 points per game to 22.3 points per game. But Julius Randle, he went from 20 points per game to 24 points per game. That's not a huge improvement. You're kind of like, okay, well, you're already kind of a 20-point per game scorer. You just up your scoring numbers a little bit, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's the fact that Jeremy Grant made the bigger improvement, but Julius Randle made the harder improvement, right? I feel like it's a little bit easier to take that step from being sort of like a middling, like 8-point per game guy to once you get onto a team where you can be the number 1 scoring option like Grant did on the Pistons, and then you can just jump up your scoring numbers a lot and get into that 20-point per game range. But Julius Randle made the jump from being sort of like an average, power forward. He's good, but he's not great. Kind of people were starting to label him as, he's kind of draft bust, blah, 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 blah. And he took the jump from that to being, in my eyes, he should be a second team all NBA player this year. And to take that sort of step, it's kind of like the analogy. I'm drawing the blank on what the real analogy is. And if you know it, correct me, but I think it's something like, it's easier to get from nothing to $1 million than it is to get from like $1 million to $2 million or something, or $2 million or something like that. It's like I forget the analogy, but it's sort of that thing that it doesn't look like much of an impressive improvement on the stat sheet that Julius Randle did, but it was much more of a significant and harder thing to do, to take that step from being just an average power forward who could score and get rebounds to being a guy who can be a true number 1 option on a top seeded playoff team. And so for that, it's got to be Julius Randle in my eyes.
Yeah, I really liked how you broke down, especially the 3 of them, especially Jeremy Grant. If he was on another team, I feel like he'd be getting much more recognition. and you think, all right, it's Michael Porter Jr., Julius Randle, and then you like Jeremy Grant's tacked on to both of them, and you're like, all right, he's immediately out just because he's not on the 3rd seeded Nuggets or the 4th seeded Knicks. But I think I agree, Julius Randle will take this home. I think the Knicks out of the 3, like I talked about, he's got to be at least one that wins out of the 3 if Thibodeau and Rose don't win their respective awards. All right, so we're winding down. We have about 2 minutes left, so let's just give our last picks of the night, our final series, our 2 finals teams and champions. So Joe, I'll let you go first. I know you've been dying to say yours.
So I am, of course, riding with my team. I'm picking the Brooklyn Nets to win it all. I think, there's too much talent. I already talked about it earlier. Too much offensive firepower. 3 Hall of Fame players. They're going to put to rest all the narratives of there's only one ball and, Kyrie can't win without LeBron and KD can't carry a team by himself. And, Harden's not a winning style of basketball type player. No, we're putting it all together. It is Brooklyn's year. It is a Nets world. Brooklyn Nets will win the NBA Finals. And the team I have them beating is the Denver Nuggets. I have the Nets over the Nuggets in the finals. I gushed about the Nuggets here. I just have a feeling about them this year. I believe in them. Jokic is playing out of his mind. I'm going to always pick the MVP of the league in a majority of the series. I think the only team that can really give the Nuggets work is the Lakers. And to be honest, the Lakers in that game against the Warriors, they didn't look that great to me. I mean, the Warriors, no doubt, are a pretty good team with Steph Curry, but I mean, they had the Lakers on the ropes a little bit. And yeah, it's only one game, but I mean, the Lakers are going to have a tough task in the first round against the Suns. They're not going to get that easy, play an 8 seed and, get conditioned a little bit and easily beat a team. You can drop a game, but it's okay because they'll probably win the next 3. No, they're going to have to come right out of the gate firing. And I think the Lakers might get a little run down. And, I just think Nikola Jokic outside of LeBron is the best player in the West right now. And I'm just banking on him carrying that team. I'm banking on Michael Porter Jr. stepping up into Jamal Murray's role, going absolutely off in this playoffs. Aaron Gordon's going to play some meaningful minutes for them. Campazzo, remember the name, Facundo Campazzo. He is going to make at least 3 highlight reel assists in this playoffs. So I've got the Nuggets coming out of the West, but again, I've got the Nets going over them. So that's my pick for the NBA Finals.
So I think you gave excellent analysis for both of those teams, Joe. And I'm going to just keep, for our content purposes, to kind of go against like yours, just so we have 2 opinions. And because I did host X's and Opinions this past week, so you guys, all viewers, should check that out on our Spotify and other streaming platforms. As Michael Daly was one of my analysts on that show, and we really talked about how the narrative of Donovan Mitchell versus Ben Simmons, how they've been that rivalry since, they were rookies, or Ben Simmons you consider was a rookie, or so to say. I think that could be the NBA Finals this year. I think the Nets will definitely make it the conference finals by a landslide. I just have a gut feeling about the Sixers this year. Even though even Ryan Henry isn't even that sold on them, I think it's possible the way Joel Embiid's been playing, just the way they are defensively matched up against a Nets team. But I just have a gut feeling about the Sixers. I think the Nets could easily win the East too, but I'm going to roll with the Sixers this year. And with the Utah Jazz, again, with Donovan Mitchell, once Mike Conley and them come back healthy, just the way the Wild West has almost fallen out this year, it couldn't have worked, I think, any better for them. That the Lakers are a 7 seed and could get knocked out early. That, the Clippers, they're probably going to be a pretender once again. I do love the Nuggets. And like I said before, if Jamal Murray's on that team, they'd be my finals pick. But I just think that when they're matched up against a Jazz team that just, they're top 5 in both offense and defense efficiency, I think it's going to be so hard to stop them, especially down the stretch. And could put Rudy Gobert on Nikola Jokic. That's going to be a Clash of Titans type matchup if they both make it. And I think that the Utah Jazz will win the NBA championship this year. There's just so many things thrown on my head about maybe the Lakers, like Ryan said, could go that far. The Nets easily, I think, are the favorites to win. I just have a different feeling about the Jazz this year and the way they've been playing. And when you think of past championship teams, of having, even like a Dallas Mavericks team that obviously didn't have a LeBron type level, but obviously Dirk Nowitzki's a Hall of Famer, but just, great players, just great, Rudy Gobert's defensively, Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles, just across the lineup. They have so many just weapons and just across the board. I'm really sold on them this year, and I think they will be my personal pick for the NBA champions. But that does about do it for WSU sports coverage of the 2021 NBA playoffs. Once again, I'm Jonathan Haidt alongside Joe Matthews. Joe, I want to thank you for a great over 2.5 hours. Now we ran a little bit late, but I had so much fun doing this with you, and I love doing all these shows with you. So just thank you again for everything.
Of course, it's an honor to host alongside you, Jonathan. You're the absolute man, class act. And for the people out there watching, get ready. In 15 minutes, the Grizzlies and Warriors tip off in that final NBA play-in game. And, watch that and get excited, find out who the Jazz are taking and who the Jazz are going to be matching up against. And then after that, it's when the butterflies start and you got to get ready and get yourself amped up.
Tomorrow.
Immediately tomorrow afternoon, we're kicking off. It's NBA playoff season, baby. And it's going to be so much fun to watch this year. Been waiting for it for a long, long, long time. And you just got to be excited, man. So thank you again, Jonathan, for doing the hosting on this. It was an honor.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Last year, obviously we were excited, but this year, now that it's some sense of normalcy, so much to be excited about. But before we go, I just want to do special thanks again for our analysts that came in earlier in our show, Ryan Henry, Michael Daly, Joel Moran, and Ryan Johnston. Behind the scenes, our brand new sports director, Heaven Hill, who produced our show tonight. Thank you, Heaven, for giving us the opportunity to do this and for everything going forward. Really appreciate it, and we have a lot of fun. But again, I'm Jonathan Haidt, signing off for the night. This was our NBA playoffs coverage.